I call this meeting to order of the Rancho Simi Recreation and Park District. Tonight, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance is Jordan Downey, a student at Sinaloa. She's in the National Junior Honor Society there. And Jordan, I have two questions for you. My first one is, what's your favorite local park?
I'm a big fan of Lemon Park. It's right around my house and it's fun to go to.
The next question I have for you is, what's a service project that NJHS is currently working on?
The members are currently doing whatever they can during Corona.
I can imagine that's tough. Well, Jordan, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yeah. Could everyone please stand again? Hand over your heart and we're ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay.
Thank you, Jordan.
Brian, I did not catch her favorite park. I didn't hear what she said.
So she used the common terminology of Lemon Park.
Oh, Lemon Park. Okay, thank you.
Jordan, thank you for your time. Gina, will you call the roll?
Director Abela.
Here.
Director Freeman.
Here.
Director Gray.
Here.
Vice Chair O'Brien.
Here.
Chair Dennert.
Here. Dan, are there any items for agenda review?
Yeah, Chair and Board of Directors, thank you. I've got a few items. One, I just wanted to note that follow-up items from last week's Oak Park Committee meeting will be scheduled on the board's next meeting, which is our designated Oak Park meeting. So if there's anybody on the line that you can still comment, obviously, but there's not a discussion item on tonight's agenda, it will be on the board's agenda on February 4th. Also, after the agenda was printed, Eagle Scout Johnny Contreras let us know that he wasn't going to be able to make it this evening under item 7B. So I'd recommend that we reschedule that item. And then lastly, we sent out a revised draft letter for the item 9B to Edison. So we updated the draft letter for the board's consideration and distributed that this afternoon. That concludes the agenda review, Chair.
Thank you. That brings us to the public statements for items not on the agenda. If a member of the public has a comment on anything that's not on the agenda, you can unmute yourself and ask, or raise your hand, or just let us know. I see Mark Johnson.
Yes, I was wondering if the general manager could get an update on the wind damage that I noticed that a lot of our parks have trees down all over the place.
Yes, I plan to do that under the district manager comments.
Okay, wait till then. That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other members of the public? I only pause in case they're trying to find their unmute button. If that comes up, unmute yourself and let us know. But we're going to go on to approval of minutes. I do have one correction to the minutes. I'm looking at page 3. And on page 3, it mentions the blood drives. The blood drives are at our facilities. So on February 12th, it's at Rancho San Susana Community Park. I mentioned that because shows that we're providing partnerships with local groups and allowing them to use our facilities. But also, that means we could, as individuals, it's one of our parks, we could go visit that day. Are there any other updates or comments on the minutes?
No, I'll move to approve as amended.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Josh, I think I saw an aye. And a Kate, yes?
Yes, I'm a yes. I am.
That's a unanimous approval of the minutes. That brings us to the consent agenda. Any member want to pull an item for discussion?
I did have a couple of questions. Just as a curiosity, on the first page, the Capri payment, 96187. Was that up from last year? Is that higher? Can you hear me?
Yeah, Elaine, the one to 96187 is to BMC. Oh, 96188.
Yeah, 88. I'm sorry.
That is up a little bit from last year, but it's a considerably lower than 3 years ago. So we were, as a district annually, I think we were up near 950,000 for our workers' comp premiums because we had some costly cases that were working through the system. It then dipped, I think, down to about 600,000, and then this year it's slightly up. Mainly that's because the rates have gone up, not necessarily because of our historical experience.
Okay, and then one more question. On page 5, 12-212, US Bank Banking, LAIF deposit, 6,750,000.
That's our, we got our property taxes from the county. So we take that, we get the property tax from the county, and then we turn around and deposit that into our LAIF account. So that's a deposit into the LAIF account of our property taxes that we received in December.
Thank you.
I had the same question.
Is that more than we anticipated or about right?
It's a little more, but it's about right. I would just note that with the COVID revenue loss and looking really close at our budget, we had, when we originally budgeted less than that, but when we adjusted the budget to make up for some of the revenue loss, we accounted for the extra amount that we got to help offset the revenue losses in recreation.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments on the consent agenda?
I'll move approval.
Second.
I'll second.
I saw Elaine and then Ed with emotions. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. That's 5-0. It's unanimous in favor of approving the consent agenda. That brings us to presentations, scheduled items, and public hearings. Item A, presentation of the part-time employee of the month for December 2020.
Honorable Chair and members of the board, Santiago is on the line with us tonight. Welcome, Santiago. He is the December 2020 Employee of the Month. He's a maintenance worker 4 and has been with us for 1 year. This is his first Employee of the Month award. The person who nominated Santiago stated the following: Santiago shows up every day ready to tackle his job assignment with a smile. He's always willing to jump in and help out a fellow coworker with any task. Santiago's eager to learn new skills. Most recently, he learned how to fell a tree with a rather large audience. And I actually was there for that. I got to see that. He did not skip a beat, taking the instructions given and putting them straight to work. In addition, he's been trained on every piece of small equipment at the district and runs the equipment safely and efficiently. Santiago is also willing to give up his weekend plans to cover for an employee who may not be able to work or stay late should the need arise at a last-minute notice. Santiago has become an asset to the crew and to the Park District and is deserving of the Employee of the Month award. So Santiago, I've got a word to give you when we're able to do that, and the check's in the mail, so congratulations.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Any comments from any staff members, members of the public, or board of directors for Santiago?
You're on mute, Wayne.
I would just like to congratulate him and tell him to keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Oh, Santiago, we lost your picture, but I wanted to congratulate you on the Employee of the Month. I know you work hard out there for Jason, and Jason really appreciates it. I don't know if the board knows, but Santiago's father also works for us. So we have a father and son duo out there working together. They're not working together, they're on separate crews, but both of them are very efficient. I just want to congratulate Santiago on becoming the part-time Employee of the Month.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Wayne.
Santiago, I have a question for you. When you found out that you won, how did you find out?
Jason called me and let me know when I was off during the weekend.
And have you been busy clearing branches?
Oh yeah, we've been real busy. We got a big tree down.
I've seen some days where I'm not even sure if you should walk in a park. It's so windy, and I see our maintenance crews out there keeping it safe. So I appreciate that.
Oh, anytime. My
Any other
pleasure.
questions or any other comments? Congratulations again. Thank you.
Thank you.
That brings us to item C. We're skipping item B. Johnny Contreras was not able to be here tonight. So item C is status of the district's response to the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. This is a verbal report.
Thank you, Chair, Board of Directors. Dan Pernick, District Manager. I have a relatively short report this evening. We're pretty much status quo. The governor and the county, we're still under the stay-at-home order, and it appears to be an indeterminate period at this time. I am aware that our ICU capacity, I think, was at 2%, and we're supposed to be at 15 before we go into purple. So that was some of the latest news. So we did, Director Freeman had asked at a previous meeting, and we sent it out to the board, but since the beginning of COVID in March, we've not realized about $3.5 million in revenue. We also reviewed our 6-month financials, which is important because it's about half the year. We closed December, and despite the revenue loss, the staff's been doing an excellent job holding the line on the expenditures. We worked on a plan when we built this budget to prioritize and hold the line. And so we've been able to make up that revenue loss with keeping the belt tight until we get out of this thing. So I would note that President Biden did introduce a $1.9 trillion stimulus bill. So we will be tracking that as it progresses through Congress and the state and the county. And on VCSDA also sent a request to the county on behalf of all of the special districts, letting the county know what extra services, what extra costs we are facing as a result of the pandemic. That concludes my report.
Dan, I know this is a verbal report, but do we ask for questions from the public first?
Yeah, we should ask for public statements on this as well.
Are there any members of the public have questions about the verbal report? Not seeing any. Oh, Mark, what's your question?
I was just wondering, has anybody in the park district, any of our employees come down with COVID that we are aware of?
Yes, over the course of, and Teresa can correct me where I'm wrong, I'll talk in generalities. Since March, I think we've had about, I would say 10 employees that have actually tested positive. And most of those, I would say 5 or 6 in the last month have tested positive. We have protocols for exposure. We follow the county guidelines and public health guidelines for that. But yes, I think about 10 since it started and probably 6 or so within the last month.
Are most of those been just our workers, or have any even been in our youth organizations?
Those are our workers. So of our part-time and full-time workers, we've had about 6. I would note that the exposures have not come from within the district. So when you do the contact tracing, it's employees that have been out and about or at different places, and they've contracted it elsewhere and not necessarily within the district.
Thank you.
Is that in all the situations, Dan?
What's that? Yes.
Is that in every one?
That's important because that shows internally we're using safety protocols and social distancing and mask wearing, and we're not exposing each other within the workplace. So our track record of that is good.
One question I have, and I know that we discussed it before, and this question might be for Wayne. I know that our employees have instructions that if they drive together to wear a mask, and you told me before that they're trying to be very careful to not go to work if they have any symptoms. But if an employee wanted to drive to a job site separately in their own vehicle, obviously that's their gas and maintenance of their vehicle. Is there any insurance reason that stops them from doing so?
Wayne, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Technically, yes. I think Brian Kirk will be probably the one to answer this a little better. But I believe if they're using a district vehicle to go between district park sites during their working hours, that the district could be possibly partially liable if they have an accident. And I'll ask Brian to jump in if I'm incorrect here.
Brian, what I'm asking is, if a worker says, I don't want to ride in a car with another individual, can I take my own truck?
Whether they're driving a district truck or their own truck, if they're involved in an accident during the course of their employment, then there's a doctrine called respondeat superior, and the district would have liability.
And do it.
Assuming that there was some fault, negligence on the part of the driver.
And does that mean additional liability because either way they're going to be driving between sites?
I don't believe so. My recommendation would be to check with Capri to see if they've got any concerns about that, because certainly the individual, I assume, would have automobile insurance personally, but the question would be whether that personal auto insurance would cover his or her use of the vehicle in connection with employment. So my advice would be check with Capri and see whether or not they would cover an accident involving an employee using their own vehicle.
I saw your hand up.
Chair?
Yes.
If an employee chooses to use their own vehicle when a district vehicle is available, their insurance would come first before Capri's insurance coverage if there were an accident.
Well, and that you may well be right on that, Teresa. It's just that I don't, know if some insurance companies may have exclusions for use of a personal vehicle in connection with employment. I just don't know the answer to that question.
Right.
So Dan, you could give me advice on this. This is a verbal report. What I intend to do is say, if the staff, including maintenance and other departments, choose to drive separately, that they're allowed to. Now, I'm not saying that they have to drive separately. That's a different idea, but how do we do that? Like, is that something we need to vote on, or is that something?
I can do that administratively, and then I would, it's an administrative directive. I would want to follow up with Capri. One of my concerns would be that our vehicles are safer and they're inspected and they're worked on. I'm not sure the condition of certain employees' vehicles. So there's a safety element to it as well. So if we have an employee that's in a substandard vehicle that gets in an accident and we're liable, we're brought into that situation. Whereas if they're in a district vehicle, we know those are inspected and useful. So that would be an additional concern of mine, is the quality of the vehicle they're driving and what it could open up to in terms of liability.
I'd like you to consider that and look into it. With the numbers that you gave us, let's think about this. This is about the 1-year anniversary of the first case of coronavirus in America. About right now is 1 year. And you said, Dan, I think 5 or 6 of the 10 cases was the last month.
Correct.
So whatever we're doing as a district might be working well, but it's getting worse, like for employees. So I'm asking all board members if you could think of any ideas to encourage safety for our employees and protect them, to consider that and bring that up.
Yeah, Chair and Board, if we can cover our basis insurance-wise, I'd be happy to give the employees that option and make that an administrative directive.
Okay, the next question I have is vaccine rollouts. I'm speaking as an educator. I'm not going to go through all the tiers, but our school district is handling it for our teachers, and they're going with elementary schools first because they have students on campus, and then secondary schools. But I want to know, where does our after-school care workers, where do they fit into that? Because
I'm going to defer to, I know that
where do they fit in?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chair.
The questions is, where do they fit in and where do they go? So for me as a school teacher, it's going to be Simi Hospital. We don't have to drive to Ventura. And our school district is handling like the registration and such.
Okay, I'm going to defer to Teresa and Danielle and Richard. I think they've been having some communications regarding which district employees may be in those phases now where they're prioritized. And I know they've been communicating with the county on that, so they can provide an update on that for you.
Yeah, I called county health to find out what our options were as an employer, because I have had several employees reach out saying that they're interested. They've requested letters, which we provided, stating that they work in a childcare environment, even our park rangers. but County Health said that we should just watch the website and we can register when it comes time for the tier for our area of responsibility, but they weren't offering to work with us as an employer of a public agency.
The next question I have for that is, are rangers, as far as the tiers go, are they considered law enforcement? Did they give any clarity to that?
They are peace officers. So we've provided 2 letters so far to employees who have requested, one in the child care area and one for a ranger, and they were going to individually contact their physicians to see if they could obtain the vaccine.
Would that be easier just to give all of our rangers, for example, a letter saying that they're a ranger, so they could go directly to the county if that's easier for scheduling?
And we've offered it to all of them. The letter's been offered to all of them. They do have an ID card that indicates that they are peace officers, as well as, of course, their badge. So they probably already have sufficient identification, but we offered the letter in addition to that.
My next point on this is, I know that we're frustrated and many of us are scared or concerned about people in our community getting sick. So one of the ways we could counter this is the vaccine rollout. Now, I know that we're not in charge of how many vaccines there are and who gets it, but there's one statement to be said, which is it's available if you want it. And I think we should have the statement more, we encourage you with the approval of your doctor to get it, which is a totally radically different statement. Get it if you want versus let's get back to work. Let's get businesses open and schools open. Let's encourage people. So I know it's just a verbal report, but as it comes out, I would like to see we encourage, not require, I'm not talking about requirement, but just encourage people to be able to get it. Any other questions on the verbal report?
Yeah.
Josh?
Just to ask, have we, as as we're hoping capacity for distribution of the vaccine increases, have we offered to county, like, I'm assuming they'll have to expand the sites beyond just the hospital. Have we offered our sites, any of our sites being outdoors or at the district, as possible venues to assist the community in vaccine?
Yeah, Director Gray, we participate in a weekly call with the city that's directed by the city's EOC coordinator. And as a part of that committee, they opened the discussion last week, and we're actually on a subcommittee with the city and others in the community to identify locations as the broader rollout goes. So as a part of that, if appropriate, we'll be offering up space, the school districts on that committee, the hospital, and folks from the city. So we haven't gotten any direction from the county yet to expand operations or if they want to set a site up here, but our community will be stepping up and offering something. And if it works in one of our properties, we'll be offering that up.
Okay, thank you.
Being that that's a verbal report, there's no vote on it. That takes us to continued business. Item A, continued follow-up discussion regarding new district logo and community outreach and promotion plan logo applications, including potential direction or redirection to staff.
Thank you, Chair. The board's discussed this several times, and we're back following the direction provided by the board at the January 7th meeting. At that time, the board asked us to reach to get a cost quote and a scope of work if the board wanted to do evaluate some additional logo options. With that, the board that we did that work, the proposals are attached. Option A or alternative 1 is to do some what they call light logo exploration. A description of that's in the report. The cost of that would be about $7,500. Option number 2 is to go into a full rework of the logo that's before the board, including new color palettes and focus groups and all of that stuff. That option's about $20,000. The board could also reaffirm its previous decision of the logo that was approved on the 17th, or you can provide us with additional direction. Just another couple of thoughts for the discussion. If the board was interested in further evaluating logos, the board consider an ad hoc committee or an existing committee to work with staff and the consultant on that. And then also the board touched on a potential public process in improving the logo. So you may want to follow up on that discussion. So if the board chooses option 1 or 2, it'd be recommended that you rescind your December 17th decision and authorize the district manager to execute a contract, and then direct us to come back to the board with those alternative logo options. And staff recommends that the board have a discussion and provide direction to staff around the options provided. That
Before we
concludes
start
that.
the discussion, there's going to be time for questions from board members, and then we're going to do community input or public comment. So if you have questions, ask questions, then we're going to do public comment, but don't go too into detail yet. Are there any questions from board members?
I do have a couple questions.
I have a question. How
Go
much,
ahead, Kate.
Ed and then, or Kate and then Ed?
Either way.
how
Kate,
much,
go
have,
ahead.
how much have we spent to date on this logo project? I'm just curious.
We've spent nothing on the logo. We have a community outreach plan, we have a social media plan, and we have what's called a brand or a style guide. So we haven't spent anything on the logo. We spent, I believe, about 17,000. It was 10,000 for the initial projects, and then they've been in retainer. So the work they've done with us, we spent about 17,000 to date, but none of that was specific to the logo. They did that work theoretically for nothing. The little bit of work they did on the logo.
Ah, okay. Okay.
You had a question?
I do. It's a series of questions, but it's all around revolving around the same issue. Dan, I know when I met with you and Teresa, and I lose track of time, give or take a week ago, I didn't write down the numbers, but I believe there were 3 area government bodies that you indicated to me that had logo exploration done, and you indicated what amounts they spent. Could you, for my benefit as well as the rest of the board, could you go over that, please?
Yeah, I believe the County of Ventura, which is obviously a very large agency and has lots of involvement, I believe that the contract with them just for the logo was $90,000. I am aware that the logo that the school district did, I don't know that they used Mustang, but when they did their new logo, I believe that was about $65,000. And then I think it was Conejo or Costco or the city of TO used them for a logo. They have a nice oak tree over it and things like that. I believe that was about $40,000. And then there was another agency, I think locally, I don't remember, and that logo expiration, smaller agency was in line with about 20,000. Those were all brand new logo development projects.
So in terms of options 1 and 2 that the board has, those numbers that you've spoken with Mustang about and negotiated with Mustang, relatively speaking, those are pretty good deals for exploration of a logo.
Correct. Those are good deals. And also I would note that the deal we got on, I don't remember if the board recalls the public community outreach plan, but all the work they did on that and the exploration with us, the amount we've spent on them on those other parts have been a really good deal. So given the staff time and these costs specific to the logo are a good deal as well.
Okay. And Brian, the rest of what I have is comments, so it'd probably be appropriate for me to wait till after public comments.
Any other board members with questions before public comments? That brings us to public comments. Any member of the public want to speak about the logo? Mark?
Yes, I understand that you're going over a new logo and you've already voted 4-1 to maintain the logo, but you're spending public money, and to go back out and spend more money that you already lost $3.5 million, I think it'd be irresponsible of the board members to go ahead and take public money and just, we're going to go after a logo that the 4 of the board members were completely solely satisfied with what you had. One board member doesn't like it or wants it, well, majority should rule and you should go on. You've wasted many, many hours of staff time, many, many hours of work going over for a logo. And quite frankly, how many people really, really know about the logo? If you had 100 people out here in the public worried about it, I think you'd hear about it. But if you're willing to spend another $7,000, $20,000, whether it's a good deal or not, it's still public money. You can't give raises, you can't improve, you can't give, decreases in recreational expenses, but you can spend money on a logo. I just think you should take number 3 option and move on. That's my comment.
Thank you, Mark. Is there any other member of the public with comment on the logo? that brings us to board members' discussion then. Ed, I believe you said you had some comments.
Right, I do. First, let me respond to the public comments. Obviously, as we all know, Mark was a board member previously, and we did discuss the logo in November. And part of the problem here wasn't just, as I mentioned last time, I'm not going to rehash what I've mentioned the last couple meetings, but it's an issue of, yes, majority rules, but also that the minority has a right to be heard, and board members have a right to receive the information that was requested, which has led us to the point that we're at right now, that we didn't get that information at the December meeting. And I detailed that with timestamps for the November meeting. So I won't rehash that, but I just wanted to respond in that regard. The other thing that I'll mention, and I totally see this completely different than Mark in terms of the importance of the logo. Part of the problem is maybe the public doesn't really know what our logo is, and the whole idea of a community outreach program and promoting our district is to improve our brand. And I mention it over and over again, but what a great job the school district did. So when you view it that way, and you view the importance of the outreach program and the importance of the logo to the outreach program, which again, I credit the district manager for bringing the logo to the board and understanding that importance, that's the part that we can't minimize here. In the scheme of things, in terms of the budget that we have, and likely later this evening, we're going to approve a $50,000+ project for the May Boyer playground, roughly in the area of a $50,000 project for Strathern Historical Park. But when you think about the lasting effect of a logo and promoting our district, and when you consider the fact that if there was ever a time in the past century, which takes us beyond the existence of our district, if there was ever a time to work on a rebranding or and to have top-notch rebranding, now is the time to do that. And in the scheme of things, when you compare what other districts have spent, understanding the importance of that, $7,500 to get the information we want and to make the best decision on a logo just isn't that much. I'm going to qualify it with one comment. The only thing I'm going to say is, and I'm certainly would vote for the option of spending the $7,500, not the more expensive option, because what we're talking about for the $7,500 is what we've been looking at all along. But what I would emphasize here, I mean, if a board member has their mind made up, if they're set on the busy logo with the trees and the hills and all of that, I mean, if they're set on it, then they shouldn't vote for this, because then they shouldn't spend 75 cents on it. But I would like to think that for something this important, that there's an open mind to it, and this is just a bargain in the scheme of things. And when Dan's been able to negotiate this for us at such a bargain price, to me, it would be a shame to pass that up. But I will qualify that again with it shouldn't be doing it just for the sake of doing it at this point. It should be doing it with the understanding of, hey, we could come up with something really special here. So I'll just leave my comments at that. The rest of the things, I would just ask I trust that the board recalls everything I've said at the previous couple meetings and the points I've made there, and I won't rehash all of that.
Are there other questions or comments from board members?
Yes, Director Dennard, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Elaine, go ahead.
Because the sound hasn't been very good tonight. I've given this an awful lot of thought. The trees were first brought into the district in the late 60s by the general manager, Walt Rahut. And we have those trees on our signage. They are our branding, as far as I'm concerned. And I think that we do not need to get rebranded, because trees are just an integral part of our district. The hills represent what we are here in Simi Valley. We have hills around us. So from my perspective, I would not want to go ahead and move forward with spending any more looking at this. The trees are part of the district's history. And I think the addition of the hills amplifies Simi Valley and Oak Park because we're both surrounded by the hills. And so I respect what Director Avila feels, but personally, I think that we don't need a rebranding. Our brand is the trees and the hills. Thank you.
Kate or Josh? Kate?
I want to echo what Director Freeman said and also what Mr. Johnson said. I think I feel strongly about keeping the trees, and I don't think we really need to be rebanded that much. I'm leaning toward option 3, where we just reaffirm the one we approved last time and move on.
Josh?
I don't know. I'm conflicted because I have not been involved with the district as long, but the district has been around my entire life. And in my view, branding should be, if you took away the words, and then from an image, would I be able to tell you what that organization is? If you showed me the trees, I wouldn't know what organization you were talking about. And that may be, that's a personal view, that's a personal perspective. But when I look at the trees, I do like them. I like that they're trees. I like that it's nature related and related to us. But as someone, I was a kid and I should have seen that logo and I should be able to identify it as someone who was participating in the programs and the offerings of the district. And I can tell you, I wouldn't have been able to look at those trees and know that it was Rancho Simi. So I am tempted by the idea of doing it correct and seeing if we can't come up with a better option. If we're
Let me
not
ask Director Gray. If Director Gray, if it was a playground, do you think you would have still recognized it? I think as a kid growing up and participating, nobody pays attention to the branding or the logo. I mean, it's on our signage. We've spent a lot of money on signage for the parks, and we're using those trees. And are we going to change that now and have to rechange and change all the signage? I think that's a trickle-down effect of doing anything if we remove the trees. So just a thought.
Chair Denner?
Yes.
If I can just interject one thought on that. You know, I've seen the signage too, and what we're really talking about going forward isn't the signage, it's other materials that we're going to be using. And to be honest with you, I've paid close attention to the signage, and the usage of that logo is inconsistent on the signage anyway. But second, and the district manager has alluded to this before, if we came up with a new logo, the trees in the form that they exist could remain as, I forget the, I believe brand mark is the term. I don't know if I'm using the right term, but could be used as a brand mark. And that would likely be the most effective way, but I'll just leave it at that.
Dan, I have a question about option number 1. So I like the idea of looking at new logos, but I'm not sure if option number 1 really is new logos. And what I mean by that is if we pay $7,500, my concern is we'll come back and choose the exact same logo we currently have. So we spend $7,500, and I understand, Ed, the 2 major points that you brought up, which is the process and getting the information that we need. And then the second one is what does the logo or brand mean? So I'm interested in option number 1, but I'm not convinced that we're going to see much different. We're going to see the exact same logo mixed up a little bit. Are we going to see trees and no trees, but some other trees? Like for $7,500, what are we getting?
I just want to point to the comment on the brand. Now I forget what it is, but the brand stamp or whatever. Yeah. So anyhow, part of what we heard, and this is also to Director Gray's point, is that with our community outreach plan, which is the other part of this, that the goal of the plan is to get a brand. We heard that people, they know our programs and they know us, but we need to get to more people. So there's a lot of people familiar to the district, but we want to get to more people. So the goal with the logo and the brand image is to push that out in the community and pound that in so that kids that were growing up here now would know what the trees are. That's kind of the goal. So just to note that. Brian, to your point, as I understand it, I would call option A probably some work within the construct of the logo before you. So you are correct. It would be different fonts. We could probably do some work on the trees if we want the trees to look different. But it would be with what I would call a cleanup or a further exploration of the conceptual logo that's before you. Option B would be starting from scratch. So if you wanted to throw this logo out the door and start from scratch and come up with new colors and a whole new concept to the logo that's different than this with the trees and the hills, that would be option B. So I would describe option A as some variations or some other options that were kind of within the construct of what you have now, and option B would be a fresh start.
May I ask a question, Chair?
Yes.
Dan, on the, I'm actually not a fan of the committee thing, nor am I really here, but in terms of suggesting a committee, I assume part of the idea of that is obviously it's not for two people, especially on this issue, to give advice and make the decision for 5. But I assume the idea of having an ad hoc committee or something similar to that would be to have a couple people give direction on, how they would like to at least see options for the logo headed, understanding that the current option that was chosen could still be the choice. But I assume that would be, is that the reason you're making
No, that would be kind of the role. The role more is that you would be in a room when they actually did the logos and brought them back to us. And we were vetting, maybe they do, 6 or 8 different options, is to provide an efficient and timely input from the board so that we're not in a room with just staff and then we bring you a logo, that none of you like, and we've spent all of that time narrowing it down. So it's really for a couple of board members to provide input during the development and the process of the logo, in addition to providing input on the front end.
And Dan, one more question, just based on what you just said. How many options do you think we would get for that $7,500 from Mustang itself?
I don't know, Dan. I think when we originally started this, they brought us probably 8 different options, which we narrowed down to 2 or 3. And they were all within kind of the same vein. They have some different fonts. So I would think, what it is, they do a draft and they might give us, 14 or 15, and then we narrow it down and give some comment on 8 of them. They bring us back 8, and then we try to narrow that down to, 2 or 3. So, I can't say for sure, but, I would say in the range of 10, but a lot of the variations aren't going to look a whole lot different than that. You know what I mean? There's not, some of them may be very close to this, but without trees. Or
some may be close, some may be further away from it.
Yeah. So it's hard for me to say how many they would give us, but I think, that would be up to their stylistic professionalism on what they thought they could do for $7,500.
Sure, Dennard, is there a time for a public comment before the vote?
Harry, there was time for public comment right before you joined.
I'm sorry, I thought the meeting started at 7.
That's okay. Let me check if we are able to take your public comment now. Dan, is there anything that stops us from allowing Harry to speak now?
No.
Harry,
just real quick, I'm thrilled you guys are talking about the logo. I would just ask for 2 things. If you do get a committee together, please think about including someone from Oak Park on the committee, because the logo definitely affects us. And 2, I love the fact that you're talking about updating the logo, because I always felt that those trees don't look like trees in Rancho Simi, at least not trees in the Oak Park area. They're a little too skinny. We don't have, it looks a little bit more like what you'd find up north to me, or like even in Seattle. So if we do redesign the logo, I'd love it to look more like trees that you would find in our area, because especially they're so skinny, it's really hard to see that they are trees, especially when the logo is really small. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Sure. I would just note that there is, would be some inconsistency with all of our signage, all of our vehicles, all of that kind of thing. If we, you know, we do have trees on the sign, so, and they're exactly the trees here. So not to say we'd have to change the signs, but the signs would be inconsistent if we changed the trees too much.
Okay, I just don't think they look like trees.
Some that were somewhat in keeping with the signs, that's all.
Chair, if I could just make one comment. Harry, I know you haven't been part of the previous meetings when we discussed the logo, but I just want to say that you've, in my opinion, you've hit the nail on the head. The only reason we know those are trees is because it says Rancho Simi Recreation and Park District. It's not, the trees don't tell us that it's Rancho Simi Recreation and Park District. The fact that it's Rancho Simi Recreation and Park District is what tells us that those are trees. I mean, that's part of the problem with the logo, but I appreciate your comments, Harry.
I was wondering, Director Avila, how your vision is. I mean, is it to show recreation activity, or did you have something in mind?
Well, I'm not a logo designer, Elaine. That's why we would be paying $7,500. What I've stated consistently is, number one, what Harry stated in terms of the meaning or lack of meaning for those trees, and number two, that the logo that has been chosen as our logo is too busy, and for us to be going through a again, there's no other way. I mean, you can use whatever terms you want, but essentially a rebranding, an updating of our community outreach, trying to be more identifiable and to the public that that busy of a logo isn't going to get the job done. So,
Ed, I get what you're saying about a busy logo. If the logo comes back and it's the same idea, slightly different font or color, and has trees that are recognizable as trees, but it's not those trees. Still seems like it's a busy logo, which is one of your objections to it.
right. Again, I'm not a designer unless, you know, I don't know how to design stuff. You don't even want me to attempt it, but I can tell you, you know, there's probably different ways of incorporating the trees than other than having them beside there, and then you have the hill. You know, I'm not a designer. I don't know how to get to that point. I'm just better at indicating what doesn't look like it's working. So you know, without seeing it, I can't answer the question. I wish I could. If I could, I'd present a logo to you guys.
Elaine,
but I can't.
I have a question for both of you. It's about the trees. I like the symbolism of trees, but those particular trees, is it because of the history of the trees, or is it that it's a park district, it should have trees in it? And the reason I ask that is, if it comes back to the board and we spend the $7,500 and there's different trees there, Ed might not like it because it's busy. And would you not like it because it's different trees? And then I might not like it if there wasn't trees in it. Elaine, I'm asking, like, is it specifically those trees, the value in it, that it's the history of those trees and the logo?
I suppose I could live with different trees, slightly different. I think trees are kind of important, though.
And Elaine, if they came back with just totally different trees, is that possibly acceptable? I mean, I know you don't have it in front of you, or is it those specific trees because it's the history?
For me, it's the history and that they're already used on all of our new signs. And I think it's just a waste of $7,500 because I think what we chose shows the hills and the valley and the trees, and that's what we're all about, Simi Valley and Oak Park.
I know that we're speaking about the logo, but that's a part of our marketing plan. Dan, is there a possible way to identify some savings in our marketing plan if this is a part of it? like we have a total budget for the marketing plan. If we say we'd like the logo exploration, is there a different part of it that we could adjust?
You mean to pay for it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I would say we're not doing as much on the advertising side right now with our advertising budget because the programs are closed. So we could probably absorb it within the existing marketing budget.
And then I imagine with the landmarks or the signs in front of parks, we'd obviously keep all those the same and replace them as we go.
I wouldn't, that's a heck of a thing, and that is going to take you years to do. I wouldn't replace, you know, it's up to you guys, but my thinking is we'd keep the signage. We'd just develop some trees that had some link to the signage if you want different looking trees. I mean, obviously the board, we can change those signs as we go, but we've got, 60 parks and signage everywhere with those trees on it and our vehicles. You're probably talking about a, 25 or 30-year transition to do that. Or, you can allocate money and do so many updated signs per year, replace the trees on the existing signs if it's available. So it would take quite a while to get those signs replaced unless the board put aside a significant amount of money to do it over.
I don't have an interest in
Chair?
replacing those signs in our budget. Ed?
Chair?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the easiest way I can respond to that is I wouldn't be asking to replace the signs. I think if you, you see Brett Favre over my shoulder, if you look over Richard's shoulder there, you could have a new logo and still have, again, I called it a brand mark, call it a stamp, whatever you want, that would be consistent with the signage we have. I'm not saying that's what we would go with, but that could be one of the options that's presented. And then you wouldn't have to worry about replacing signage or anything like that. I'm not saying we go with that option, but I'm just saying there's, if we're going to be getting 6 to 10 options on what we can do, that's one of the things that they could look at, and then we can decide what's best. I don't think it would be necessary to replace the signage. I think this really has to do more with branding as far as advertising, social media, written communication, that type of thing. I mean, and certainly if a concern was what we already had on our signage, it brings us back to incorporating, like I say, what Richard has over his shoulder there as a brand stamp or brand mark or whatever term you want to use for that.
Chair Dennett, is it possible to make one more quick public comment regarding this, which I think is a solution?
Because of the format of this meeting, I think that might be possible. Dan, is that anything in our rules?
The chair's prerogative.
Harry, go ahead.
Okay, I think we're all on the same page, or you guys are all on the same page, and I think Elaine's got a good point. I mean, it's a heritage logo, but maybe there's a way that we don't have to spend that kind of money on it too. Is it possible there might be someone in the community, I certainly know people here in Oak Park, who would volunteer pro bono to just do like a little refresh of the logo, not to change it dramatically, but to just make it kind of clear that they're trees, because you can't quite see the trees. And for instance, I know a guy named Brian Rooney who wrote the book about Malibu Lake, who's a designer. He might do it for free, or somebody in Rancho Simi might do it for free just to take credit and say, hey, I'm the guy who came up with the logo. $7,500 seems like a lot for a rough draft. So unless you have a contract with a company that is going to do this, I wonder if you could save the money and just play with the idea, especially for just a sample. It seems like a lot of money.
So Harry, what we're discussing is a contract with a company to do it for us. We've done it in-house and we've come up with ideas in-house, but beyond the capabilities of our in-house people. And Elaine and Kate, that goes back to something that was important to both of you, which is if Harry did find somebody that adjusts the trees and makes them more look like trees, but it's the same idea of those trees. I want to hear from you two first, and then Ed after that. Same trees, but they're just refreshed. Dan, do you have something to say about that?
I would not recommend that. I'd recommend we have a professional consultant do it with the credentials and the graphic designer that we have for that amount of money. I also just wanted to mention to the board that, we have time, but on the con side of this, going down that path, also with public involvement, I've seen those spin into a 9 or 12-month process, and eventually it costs you additional money through the consultant because the public doesn't like it or if there's ideas. So I just want to caution the board that once you start introducing those kind of concepts, that can spin real out of control real quick. Same with public involvement. Not saying that if the board wants to do that, certainly you can. I'm just cautioning you that that can draw the logo exercise out probably 9 to 12 months versus we're using the professional logo. We get it, we bang it out in a month or two, and we're back to the board in a month and a half or 2 months.
Right, Dan. So just so that it's clear, option number one is what you were saying would take a month or two. Starting to have other people provide options to us is what could drag it out 9 months to a year.
Correct. So you may be, you may be saving a few bucks on, having other people do it or try to get people from the community to do it or involve the public. But you're going to easily, because we're going to be delayed and all the staff time involved in that process will be more than the $7,500 you're trying to save, in my opinion.
Right.
My concern still remains, which is we spend $7,500 and we come back with almost the exact same logo. Or we spend $7,500 and what Mustang marketing provides for $7,500 is the trees are slightly different. They're on the right side instead of the left. The font is a little bit bigger or a different style. But the type of things that our own staff members could do, and it's not much different, and we spent $7,500. Dan, if I'm reading the report and I get that, can you go over one more time before we start making motions and stuff? For $7,500, what are they offering?
It says in the proposal, Brian.
So different
Light
font,
logo
different color.
expiration, options without trees, options with trees, font expiration, rearrangement of some color options.
All right, and with that in mind, it says trees and without trees, because one of our goals is to be more precise in our direction. Is it the same trees? Are we just telling them to mess with those same trees or throw in some different types of trees?
If that's the direction of the board, we can get them to, to do some, keep the, kind of keep the trees, but maybe make them look a little bit more like local trees. Maybe there's 2 or 3 trees instead of 4 trees in there, So again, I agree with Ed. I'm not a designer and I'm not, you almost have to let the designer explore that and throw us options. We give them the ideas. They'll watch this meeting and the input that's provided, and they'll stylistically try to come up with options that is being expressed here by the board. But yeah, I can't, same with, I'm not an expert stylist or designer. That's why we're hiring them. And it's their job to take this input and try to meet the objectives that's being stated by the board.
I have no objection to going slow through this process and getting it right, because as Elaine's mentioned before, we've used the previous logo for a long time. And if we're going to use the logo for a long time, there's no reason to rush it because it's one meeting. But with that in mind, my current thought is I'm open to the idea of signing that with a direction to staff to try to identify some savings in the overall marketing budget. Maybe not to offset the total cost, but offset part of it. Any other input towards that?
So Chair Dennert, I appreciate that that we've had more of a hearing on this. I'm going to make a motion that we go with recommendation number 1, including the comments made by Chair Dennert that if there's a way to offset some of the costs without jeopardizing the remainder of the community outreach program, that is the direction that we send to the staff. So that's my motion.
Dan, feedback on that motion?
Just if there's a separate motion, I did want to get some direction from the board on a committee of 2 potentially, and also just to follow up on the whether or not there's public involvement, just to close that discussion out. So we can take the motion, I think, as Ed stated, and address those 2 other points separate from the motion, or you can, I just don't want to forget those 2 items. Is all.
My recommendation is that you ask whether there's a second for the motion before you start discussing it.
There's a second for that motion? I'll second the motion. And then that brings us to a vote on the motion in front of us, which is item number 1. And then after that, if that passes, we'll talk about public involvement in a committee as separate motions. Seeing no other discussion, Gina, will you call the roll on that?
Director Abela,
Aye.
Director Freeman,
Elaine.
Director Freeman,
No,
Director Gray,
No.
Vice Chair O'Brien,
No,
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 Chair Dennert.
No. So seeing that that motion has failed, I don't see a need unless there is for public involvement or committee, those two separate motions on it. Are there any other motions related to this item?
I would like to make a motion to reaffirm option 3, to reaffirm the one we decided on last time.
Dan, is that
I'll
required?
second that.
I'll defer to the attorney. Brian, we had a decision on this on a 4-1 vote on December 17th. So that decision still stands because it hasn't been rescinded. So I don't know if there's a need to just stick with that one or to reaffirm the one on the 17th.
My
I
advice
think
would
we
be
can
to
go either way.
given that there's been so many meetings since then and options being discussed, my advice would be to proceed with the motion as it's been made and see if there's a second for it.
I second it.
So that was Kate and then Elaine, was that correct? To reaffirm the
Correct.
motion? All right, now time for discussion of that motion, just to clarify. I'm holding up in front of me the packet that we all have in front of us. And one of my questions is doesn't really work with the virtual background much. One of my questions is, which one are we going to see most often in print media, like a newspaper? The acceptable variation, which does not have the trees, or the full logo? I'm not expressing a preference. I'm just wondering what we'd see like in the newspaper. Like if there's an Acorn ad for concerts in the park this summer.
Yeah, I think we will be pulling the trees out sometimes and making it a part of the ad. It may not be a part of the logo. So I think that's why we have the retainer with the consultant. So over the course of the first year, as we develop material, Acorn ads, a new trail map, a new handout map, new website, I think it's going to be a variation of, whether or not you see the new logo, and you may see it with, without the trees on occasion. So I don't know at this point if I could predict which one we would mostly see. The one, you picked the letterhead, so clearly we use our letterhead a lot. And I would think that, on our principal materials, you're gonna see, the full logo with the trees mostly, but you will see variations on that without the trees for different material. So I would say it's gonna be the full logo mostly. That's tough to tell though, because that's where the designer is going to be on retainer helping us design those materials over the course of the next year or so.
And I assume, Dan, because we've spoken about this previously, there'll be remixes for different holidays, like Pride Month, maybe a rainbow, or for
Yeah, we've talked about that. That'll be discussion.
4th of July, it's in red, white, and blue, like
Yeah,
variations.
that'll
like
be
that
a
we'll provide
retainer
to us.
discussion, but the idea is, and I will defer the experts on that, we want to establish the logo, but I would envision over time, we can get creative with the logo, make it different colors, make it fall colors, put flags in it, those kind of things. I don't know exactly the timing of when that will occur, but I would envision some creativity with the existing logo, around certain themes.
Any other discussion on the motion? I think, Josh, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, my thought is I just don't like half measures. And so if I'd rather do it right to begin with. And if we're not going to do that, I'd rather minimize cost. And I'm not, yeah. So.
Can you clarify that?
Sure. I stand by my previous remarks where I don't think our current logo is great or fantastic as a logo itself. I love the history. I love the precedence that's there. I would rather see us, if we're gonna rehash any of it or spend any expense, I'd rather do it properly and do the full expense. But in context of our current situation, losing money, the pandemic, I'd rather not spend a partial sum on variations at this point.
All right, so we have a motion to reaffirm the previous.
May I make one comment?
Yes, Ed?
Sure. I just want to reiterate something that Josh just said. The majority of the board is about, in a district that takes pride in the great things that we do, is about to vote in favor of a logo that could stay with us for decades that is not great or fantastic. That's all I have to say.
All right, just let me say that I don't take this decision lightly because I've been involved with the district for a long time. And I have no problems with what was proposed, what we voted on before. I think it tells the story of the district. And so not to be pointed out that maybe we're not taking this seriously or doing a good job, because I think we are doing a good job.
Josh?
I will say on top of that, I appreciate everybody's remarks. And I will say with this, I am hopeful that with the new marketing campaign and the effort that staff is doing and the other aspects of this project, that we can make the logo more impactful for young people. And I want to be a part of that, and I want to encourage that. But I do think it's not ideal. Thank you.
So looking at the motion on the table to reaffirm the decision, which is item number 3. I assume that's going to be a roll call vote. So Gina, will you call vote on that motion? But I apologize. Before we do that, let's just clarify what the motion is. So to reaffirm the board's previous logo decision would be to choose the updated logo with acceptable variations, trees and no trees, depending on the marketing situation. Dan, do you need any other clarity on that?
No.
All right. And my last comment is the process is important in how we treat each other, that we're polite, respectful, we listen to each other and informed. And sometimes I have one way of thinking about it, but after listening to my fellow board members and their thoughtful opinions, it persuades me. So there is a room for compromise and listening to each other. So with that, we call the vote.
Director Abla.
No.
Director Freeman.
Yes.
Director Gray.
Yes.
Vice Chair O'Brien.
Yes.
Chair Denner.
Yes. That brings us to new business. Item A, discussion and consider approving board member input, involvement in the recruitment and selection of department head positions in the district.
Thank you, Chair and Board of Directors. At the previous meeting, Director Abela expressed some interest in being involved in the recruitment for department heads positions. I've given some thought, as he asked me to do, and I have some options for the board to consider. I did want to note that there's an existing policy, and I'll just read the policy statement that I've attached to the report. It says the authority to appoint all department heads, employees of the districts, to remove the same for cause, and the general control and supervision of the same is vested exclusively in the general manager, subject to these rules and regulations, provided, however, the appointment of all the heads of department is subject to approval of the board of directors. So the involvement of the board in the approval of department heads is in our current policy. So I wanted to note that. In order to aid the discussion, I wanted to, and maybe we can, I'm going to throw out my my construct, so to speak, and the questions we need to get answered, and then maybe we can come and talk about them individually. The first item I'd recommend the board consider is, how do you want to be involved? And I would kind of bucket those in 3 buckets. One is formally. And in a formal interview, you have preset questions, and board members are actually developing scores for the candidates, like you would in a formal interview process. Preset questions, you're asking all the candidates the questions, and then you're actually ranking the candidates. The second bucket I would call more semi-formal. So you can set up an interview process where you're asking questions, but the board is not necessarily ranking them or officially scoring them. At the conclusion of the interviews, the district manager would sit with the board members and just get input with the board members without probably a formal ranking or scoring on paper. And then the last bucket I would say is informal, and that would be a process where the board's involved, but it's more of a discussion than it is a formal interview, more of a sit down meeting, I would say, than it is a formal interview process. So I would need some direction on the how, formal, semi-formal, or informal. Secondly is at what point in the process, so the timing. So the board could be involved in the vetting of the applications all the way at the front end of the process. Usually when we get applications, we narrow them down to usually what can be done in a day of interviews. So that's probably 7 or 8 candidates. That being said, if we don't feel like there's 7 or 8 qualified candidates, it may be 5 in the first round. Also, if we feel like there's more than 7 or 8 qualified candidates, we may do a day and a half. So so you can get involved at the vetting, you can get involved at say the group of 7 or 8 generally, or the board normally when you have 8 or 10, you narrow the recruitment down to a top 2 or 3. Sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 1. Generally it's 2 or 3. So does the board want to get involved at that point when you have 2 or 3 candidates? And then finally, you could get involved more informally with just a single candidate before a hiring decision is made. And then the third area is the who. If you're going to form, if the board's interested, what type of involvement does the board want and who's involved in that, whether it be a committee or the full board or anything like that. So those are the options. Obviously, if the board's interested in participating, that is fine or good. And then I would ask the board for some direction in those 3 areas. Then we'd construct the interview process around the direction in those 3 areas. That concludes staff's report. I've also attached the brochure we put together for the position for the board's information.
So before we begin, we're going to have only brief questions from board members, then an opportunity for public comments, and then we'll have a more extended discussion. At the end of that extended discussion though, Dan, is this an item that we vote on? Like, do we create a motion?
Yeah, I would say so, yes.
And then as a part of that, we're going to be very clear with our, whatever direction that we choose, that we're just very clear with that, because we might have an extended discussion with lots of different ideas, but the motion needs to be very specific so that staff could follow that motion. So before we start, any questions from staff, from board members?
Yeah,
I would just comment.
I saw Kate and then
Go
Elaine
ahead,
light up. So
Director
Okay.
O'Brien.
Right, yeah. I don't, my biggest concern is I don't want us to get involved in micromanaging, because that's always an issue. You don't want a board to micromanage. I think if we're going to do this, we should, it should have been narrowed down by the time we get involved. It should be narrowed down to maybe the top 2 or 3 candidates. So we might then.
Are we making comments or asking questions? I just want to make sure.
Questions, just
Okay.
questions.
Yeah. That's my only comment, really. It's like, I don't think it's a bad idea. I just think we have to be careful not to micromanage, which is.
All right.
why I think-
Elaine, Kate, I apologize for cutting you off. I'm just making sure we're sticking to questions first, then public comment. Elaine, do you have any questions?
No.
All right, so public comments. Harry, I do see that you're on the line. What we're discussing is the process for hiring for the Director of Recreation. Is there any public comment? I think I saw Mark move. Mark, go ahead. Mark, the time is yours.
The last 30 years that I've been involved in any of this stuff here, there's only been one time. That was when Tracy was actually hired. And at that time, the board did not have anything to do with it until it got narrowed down to the last 3 candidates. Then that was brought to the personnel, where it was then reviewed and by the general manager. And at that time, the assistant general manager told us who the 3 people were, what their qualifications were. And so that we, as the board, could go back under closed session, under a personnel matter, and tell them what they talked about, gave input. And then but the final decision was made, as it has always been made forever, has been by the general manager. And so the board only got involved in it at the very, very last stage, when all the minutia, so to speak, got out through it, and you got down to your best final 3. 3 of us were there when the last general manager was, and you know how that went. I should say 4 of us were. And if we would have went by the very beginning of that, there would have been a different outcome than there is now. And so, I mean, I've been through it. In my 30 years, we've only did it once. We did not do it for any other middle management or management position. We only did it for Tracy the one time because it was a brand new position, never before done. No one ever had that position, and it was all brand new. And so the board wanted to have input. Since then, we've never done it, just to give you some history. That's it.
I think
Chair,
Harry,
can I
was it you?
respond to that?
Ed, in just one moment, we're going to take
Okay.
one public comment.
Sure.
Is there any other members of the public wishing to comment on this, wanting to discuss it?
Yeah, Brian, it's Harry. I just want to say you guys always hire excellent people, but I think it's great for the public. So I've had no, I mean, we've just been incredibly lucky here in Oak Park to have the most wonderful people working for Rancho Simi. So we appreciate all the efforts you put into hiring good people, but it'd be great for the public to be involved at the right time, or for the board to be more involved.
Thank you, Harry. Ed, I believe you're going to respond to Mark, but after that, Ed is the one that brought it to the attention of the board that he would like this to be an item for us to discuss. So Ed, if you wanted to respond, but after that, can you tell us why you brought it up?
One comment though, before you do that, and I would like a comment for procedural purposes. Director Danner, Chair.
Yes, sir.
Usually the board doesn't give public comment back to the public. The public gets to make your comment, and then the board talks among yourself. They never come back and direct things back to the public. If that's going to be your policy that you're going to come back and now individual board members can say what the public has said or contradict or go back or say things, then you better change your policy so that the public can go back to the board members as well. In other words, you have a fruitful conversation going back and forth. And I think if you ask your attorney, that's not what you're supposed to have done on public comment.
Mark, I don't believe that's what somebody intended, but I'll listen to Ed to see what he intended.
Fine, I'm just stating what you already know.
Thank you, Mark. Ed?
All right, I'm not even going to go there. Let me just address what you said, because I think it'll all be incorporated anyway, without getting into any of the public comments. So the reason that I brought this to the board, and I'm not sure whether the public comments were referring to the same hiring or not, because there were a couple things that were confused in terms of my recollection of the one situation that I was on the board, and that was the hiring of the last director of recreation. It is true there was a personnel committee at that time. The board as a whole never had a final approval or final say, or really any say in what was done by the district manager. I know Kate had made the comment about micromanaging, and I actually agree with Kate entirely on that. I do not think as a board that we should be micromanaging. And to me, micromanaging would be if we started getting involved in all employee position interviews, even at lower levels. The difference here is we're talking about an executive staff position. And what brought this to my attention was really two things. One, I remember when we hired the last director of recreation, and I don't remember all the specifics and wording. I remember after the whole thing had taken place, I remember Director Freeman and I had a brief discussion, and we were both concerned with not having been more involved in the process. And that's a legitimate concern when you're talking about an executive staff position. The second thing that brought it to my mind, having that already fixed in my mind about this position, is a discussion I had with the mayor that he and one of the other city council members were involved with the interviews for the assistant city manager's position recently. And to me, that seemed like a good way to be involved in an executive staff position hiring. Again, I'm not suggesting that we do it for any other type of position other than, of course, the district manager position or one of the executive staff positions. So I agree with the idea of micromanaging, and I think that's one of the examples of where micromanaging would come into it if we started getting involved in the process of lower level hiring beyond that. The other thing I want to emphasize is, and I mentioned this at the last meeting when I brought it up, and I'll say it again now, I do think that while the board should make the final decision and make the final approval for the position, I do think the ultimate recommendation should come from the district manager. So in that sense, that wouldn't change. But because of the concern about the process, the last time the director of recreation position came up, and because of the fact that, let's face it, we're an evolving board that we spend more time talking to our executive staff now, and even sometimes a level or two below that, to get opinions and to get insight and to get an idea of where we want to be as a board moving forward. With all that involved, it would be a shame for the board not to in some way be involved or weigh in on the process of choosing the director of recreation. I'm not overly concerned about whether whether it's a ranking or a point total. My understanding is, again, with the city interviews for the assistant city manager position, that they did score him, but I'm not overly concerned about that, or if we did score him, whether it stayed confidential or whether we scored him at all. But I do feel that being involved in the interview process, especially as it gets down to the wire and gets down to a number of candidates, is really important. Again, in light of the direction of where the board is going, in light of the fact that there was some concern about the process last time, and but again, I do feel that the final recommendation that comes up for board approval should come from the district manager, but it can only help him to get input from board members. And I know that my understanding from the district manager is that an interview process would probably include people from the outside. It would probably include our executive staff. So, and I think there's a lot of other things involved too. I think that's a real shortcut version of what Dan has in mind. So, but to me, it would be a shame, and it would almost be derelict in our duty if we didn't weigh in, at least in some form, number one, and number two, it only makes sense that we do it because of the role that we have as board members. And again, I'm pointing that out because this is an executive staff position. I'm not suggesting that we do that for any other positions beyond that. So, and I'm not overly, I think that's a discussion that if we decide to go forward with this and we are involved in the interview process, that whether Dan thinks they should be scored or not scored, I think that's something that I would certainly ultimately listen to how Dan thinks the best way to proceed on that is. But I do think that our involvement and input is important here.
So Ed, I've given it some thought. And my opinion on it is, I want the candidates or the applicants to know that the final decision's with the district manager, because day to day, that's who they work with. I want them to know my personal opinion. I won't support ranking them or giving points. I don't like that idea because I want that.
Brian, can you restate that, please? You
I
blanked
can't
out.
hear you, Brian.
Gotcha.
I'm going to turn off my video to see if my audio improves. Do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't support ranking the candidates or giving point totals, but I do like what you said about being a part of the process where we ask some of the questions of the final candidates. And really, my thought is, it's not an evaluation of the candidates, but the process. And that's us giving input to the district manager, because the board helps to create the vision for the park district. So that means the district manager has our input on what we'd like to see from that position, but it's up to the district manager to see how the candidates meet that. Part of that is, we know some of the candidates and some of the candidates will be outside. And I want them to know there's not a favoritism from me, or they don't need to try to please individual board members, but instead the board as a total and our vision, our goals as a total. So as we discuss that, I also want us to always be kind and respectful of our applicants, because it's a stressful process. So I want to know, Dan, a little bit more about how public it is, and if we get a public comment. I imagine not, but I just mean, I would like this to be as a
Yeah, there's different options,
and,
Brian, but
reduce the amount of stress as possible.
Yeah, based on, none of this will be public until it comes to the board for the ratification or approval of the position, if you will. So the process, now there's other options to that, of course, where you can have it more public, but I would envision that it wouldn't be made public until a recommendation from me came to the board in the form of a staff report in an open meeting.
May I ask if there would be an executive session for discussion, or would it all be public? My concern is comments that might be made by the board on a candidate. I mean, I'm concerned about reactions or things that the ultimate candidate may hear. I mean, I believe the general manager has the final decision, but I don't want to get too verbal at a public meeting.
Yeah, I believe that we can, in the hiring of a public employment, there's a code section you can do closed session. I'll defer Mr. Pierik, but my understanding is if there wasn't a desire to have a closed session discussion around the recommendation prior to the public vote, we could do that. Brian?
The answer is yes.
I think that in light of respect for the applicant or applicants, I think that would be better for the board.
Any other comments or questions?
Chair, if I could just summarize what I'm hearing so far. So the board does, it sounds like the board would like some involvement. It sounds like the board is most interested in getting involved at the level of 2 to 4 candidates. And that you're leaving it to me to set up some kind of interview process, and the board isn't necessarily interested in a hard scoring or ranking, rather than involvement in their interview, conduct interviews, and provide input to the manager. And then I'm hearing, I haven't heard much on whether we want that to be, who we want that to be, but if we decide it's a subcommittee, then it would come back to the board in closed session where the district manager would make his recommendation, go through the final candidates, make the recommendation, and then it would be brought back to open session for a final decision.
Yep.
That's what I'm hearing so far.
And as a part of that, I would like to be on that committee, and I going to imagine since Ed brought this to our attention, he would. If there's another board member.
You know, I don't know why I'm sorry, but this is kind of an odd man out for me, but I don't see why we need another committee. I think the general manager could bring all the top 2 or 3 applicants into closed session, and then come back with a final recommendation, open session to the board.
Okay, Brian, let me make sure I understand that. So the first closed session discussion.
Can you hear me?
Yep. The first time we were talking about closed session, I was not envisioning that as.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Elaine.
We can hear you, Elaine.
Elaine, we can hear you. Can you hear us? Elaine, can you hear us?
The video is off. Yes.
Can you hear us, Elaine?
Yes.
Okay, I want to clarify the closed session discussion. So I understand the request for the closed session was not to conduct interviews, but rather for me or a subcommittee to bring back a list of the candidates and talk about it. What Elaine just suggested was potentially bringing the full board interviewing the candidates. So I just
No.
Okay, I just want to clarify that, yeah.
No, that was not my intent. My intent was the closed session, you would bring back the finalists.
Okay.
The board could discuss under closed session. Then once a recommendation came from you as the general manager, you are the final decision maker. Then that would be a public vote at a board meeting.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood that.
Yeah.
Chair Denner?
Yes, Ed?
If I understand, I think you and I are thinking along the same lines, but I'm not sure. So my understanding is the idea of having 2 members involved in the interview process so that we're asking questions that give direction as to what, not so much who each individual board member would choose, but give direction in terms of what the board members are looking for, and then hearing that input from the candidates during the interview process. Is that correct?
That's what I'm imagining.
Right. Me
Without
too.
us ranking it or saying hire this
Right.
person or not this person, but just
And-
us asking the questions as a panelist, giving our input that way. And then the same thing as Elaine said at the end though, which is in
Right.
closed session would come to us to discuss the final decision as a full board.
Right. And that would be similar to what the city did with having board members in there for the interview. Or they had city council members, wrong.
As a part of that though, if a board member tonight, if we voted and we chose 2 members that would do that this time, if in the future, another high-level administrator retires and there's another opening or they're promoted someplace, then I'm open to the idea. I'm not saying I always want to be a part of that. Recreation is important to me, but I'm not saying each position, I'm insisting it's me. You know, we take turns and it's somebody else next time.
So in essence, this would be the equivalent of an ad hoc committee this time.
Yeah, okay.
We would
I'm losing
form
you,
a new
Brian.
committee because it's
Yeah,
a
it
one-time
wouldn't be,
thing.
it wouldn't be the equivalent of an ad hoc committee. It would be an.
It
ad
would
hoc.
be an ad hoc committee, right?
And I'm kind of going to want you to make the motion to create an ad hoc committee, I'll be honest.
Okay, so you're going in and out in terms of sound. I think you said for someone to make a motion, so I'll make the motion that we have an ad hoc committee for the final interviews, and that Chair Dennert and I are on that committee.
I'll second that.
Can we have a discussion?
Yes.
It seems to me that the chair and the vice chair would be the people that would be participating in that committee. Just an observation,
Oh, okay.
Why would that be, Elaine?
because they are the primary representatives of the board at this point, the chair and the vice chair.
I just wanted to indicate, I feel, I'm the one who brought this to the board, and I feel like I could be really effective asking the questions in a professional way. And I respect if you don't want me on there, and that's understandable, but I really feel like I could contribute a lot to the process.
It has nothing to do with you, Ed. It has to do with who is representing and running the board. That's the chair and the vice chair right now. That's
Well,
just,
we're all running the
it wouldn't
board.
matter. It wouldn't matter if you were chair. I'd still say the same thing. It's chair and vice chair. That's just an opinion.
We're all equal voting members on the board. In any event, I've made the motion.
I seconded.
Any other comments on the motion on the floor to discuss? Dan?
I just want to, it's not necessarily a part of the motion, but just to reiterate that if this motion passes, that the committee wouldn't be involved at the final, the final top 2 or 3, they would be in an interview role. And then we would bring back the discussion to the full board in closed session and then back to the full board in open session for a final recommendation and decision. So going beyond the creation of a committee, I want to make sure that I have the direction relative to the closed session and the final board vote.
And not ranking the candidates or board members giving points in the interview, but just asking the questions and listening.
Well, I'm going to ask you guys for input and feedback. So after the committee is formed, after the interviews are conducted, I will come in and ask questions of you and get your input. It's not a formal ranking, but you guys will give me your impression, and I will be asking you guys questions about the candidate based on things that I'm interested in, and almost, getting your input on the things that I'm interested in. And then obviously you guys can add on things that you saw in the candidate that you thought relevant to the decision to hire.
My plan for that is I might give you feedback on a candidate's answer, but the feedback is not really for the candidate, but for you. So if I said, I was concerned that they didn't have this strength, that's not me saying don't hire that candidate. That means
right.
I expect you to support them in that.
Okay, and that's your guys' prerogative as members on the ad hoc on what type of input you want to provide me.
Okay, so my motion incorporates those things.
So Ed, can you restate the motion?
No, I can't restate all of that. all of the motion is to have the ad hoc committee with Chair Dennert and myself on it as part of the interview process of the final candidates, which I guess Dan at one point indicated it would be 2 to 4 candidates, that we would not score or rank the candidates, but we would provide input. And then the district manager would make a recommendation that would be brought to the board in closed session, that would be discussed in closed session before it goes into regular session for the final approval. Does that cover it, Dan? Thank you.
Yes, that's very clear.
Is there a second to that motion?
A second. I seconded it earlier, so we seconded.
Gina, will you call the roll?
Director Abela,
Aye.
Director Freeman,
Yes, but just let me re-clarify for Director Avalo, my position would have been the same if he would have been chair. So it's not personal. It's just what I was thinking was appropriate.
Thank you.
Director Gray,
Aye.
Vice Chair O'Brien,
Yes.
and Chair Dennert.
Yes, with a clarification that if this happens with a different position, even if I'm a chair, I might.
I lost
That's
sound.
a particular expertise of theirs for that.
Ryan, if you could restate that, we lost you for a brief time.
Let me see if this works. Is my voice better?
Yes.
Yeah.
That if this comes up again and I am chair, I might defer to another board member to be involved if it's an area of their passion or expertise. So if there's a different position, I'm not saying we established as chair, I get to do it. It might be somebody else next time. We could discuss that when it comes up, if it does. I'm going to request that we take a 5-minute break and come back at 8:12. I'm looking at the agenda. This brings us to new business item B, consideration and approval of letter to Southern California Edison regarding community resource center operations during public safety power shutoffs. We might all be back yet.
Yeah.
I guess.
We'll wait for Dan before we get started.
We start with questions on this, right? Then go to a community comment, and then we go to our own comments.
First, the district manager updates us about it. Then only questions, public comments, discussion.
Thank you, Chair and Board of Directors. Dan Pernick, District Manager. I note that just because we're on Zoom, so if folks are not have the video, they know who's speaking. So so folks are clear on knowing who's speaking. Director Gray had a discussion with me a few weeks ago and expressed, I think, and I'll let him restate it, but he expressed concern that the community wasn't providing resources during public safety power shutoffs or areas of respite for the community. Him and I had the discussion, and then at the last meeting, Director Gray expressed interest in sending a letter to Southern California Edison to send our desire that they provide consistent services during public safety power shutoffs. So it wasn't necessarily taking a position on the power shutoffs. It was more requesting that what they refer to as community resource centers are available to the community during the events. I did want to point out that Edison has a formal relationship and agreement with the city to provide the CRC and a location for it, and that designation in the Simi Valley Senior Center. However, and being a bit firm on this, because the staff and I, and also the city staff, have tried to work with Edison on providing these CRCs, and it's been somewhat frustrating. And I think there's a bit of it in the staff report and reflected in the letter, but it's been kind of a mess, to be honest. We drafted a letter here, I think capturing at least Director Gray's desire. It is pretty firm in terms of our displeasure with the operation of the CRCs. I'll just give you a quick example. One of the items in December I got a call from the city manager, and the designated site, they turned the power off to it. Which is supposed to be the site where you can come with your medical equipment, ask questions, make calls, for those that may not have cell phones. So Edison's designated site, the power was shut off to it. The city manager called me, I think the day before, maybe a day and a half before, and said, hey, they're shutting off the power to the senior center. Can we do the activity center? And I said, sure, we'll help out. We called Edison at that point and asked them to make sure the power wasn't going to go out at the the Rancho Santa Susana Center. About 2 hours into the day, they shut off the power to the Susana Center. So both places where we were putting out public messages where people could go, both were places without power. I understand that as Edison has committed to the CRCs, and the POC has actually mandated that they provide these, and the experience has been, it has been not managed very well. So in the spirit of that, I think, in reflecting Director Gray's desire, and it's his item, we drafted a letter to Edison. Rudy Gonzalez is our contact locally in Ventura County, and I'm sure he'll pass this along to others in Edison, expressing that we'd like to see them operate the CRCs as per their agreement and consistently and responsibly for the community. So staff's recommendation is that the board authorize the chair to sign the attached letter and send that to Rudy Gonzalez. I have noted that I've copied the city council and the city manager, so they're aware of our communication. I'm also aware, I believe the city is sending, is in the process of maybe formalizing the same. And I know the city's already been working on that. The city itself is working on the larger issue of the power safety shutoffs through congressional, state representatives and others on the larger issue of the handling of the actual public safety power shutoffs. So that concludes my report, and I'll ask Director Gray to comment.
Sure. So I do appreciate staff work. Particularly, I appreciate the more firm tone in the revised draft. I appreciate that we kind of are a little more firm in that version. That was going to be one of my comments on the initial draft.
Josh, I hesitate to cut people off, but right now we should be asking questions. Is that correct, Dan?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just, just to add on to the report. But yes, that's correct. Questions and then public comment and then back to deliberation.
Okay. I do have a question.
Josh?
Is there a reason in the draft that COVID isn't mentioned in terms of the community resource centers and the implication it has on those?
No, that's a good point, and that could be added to the draft if the board would like.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions of staff?
I do.
Kate, and then Ed?
Oh,
Kate, go
no,
ahead.
yeah, I had kind of a question. I mean, they do the public safety power shutoffs. Can they provide us with, like, if they were just going to do a blanket shutoff, could they provide us with generators or something so that we would, or some kind of temporary power?
At the center, yeah, I would think that if they set up, and this is just my opinion, if they set up a designated site and they're going to turn off the power to that site, in this case the senior center, they should have a plan and a generator there to provide power at the site where they're telling the community is the designated site. So I would think that Edison should provide that at the location if the power is going to be off there. If they don't want, if they're going to shut off the power, then they need to pick another location where they're not going to shut off the power.
Yeah, that seems kind of,
in my opinion.
Laura, were you at the center that day? Is there anything you could speak to about this?
I have to agree with Dan, very disorganized. Every time we were told we were going to be a designated site, they never showed up, never made contact with us at the community center. We even sat in the dark one time, hoping that the power would go on. And we actually had people come to the center and couldn't offer them any of the services that obviously SCE had guaranteed with them. And but they were still there just to obviously socialize with us. But obviously we had people there that needed things that needed to be charged, whether it was even a breathing apparatus that needed to have some type of or battery with it. So that was the sad part, having to send them off, and they had no clue where to go either. So everywhere destination they went that came to our facility, they literally were moved off to the next, to the next, to the next one.
Dan, you had a question or
Yeah, I
comment?
just wanted to add, and Laura raises a good point. Not only are they supposed to establish it, they're supposed to staff it. So instead of our staff, which we don't have the answers to Edison questions and we don't have the resources to set up power bars and all of those things, the obligation to run the CRC is not only providing the location, it's also to provide the staffing and the tools and the resource needed to respond to the public need.
Laura, when they came to you, did members of the public think it was a park district problem or SCE? Like, did they come to you and say, why didn't you have this? Or did they understand it wasn't you? It
No,
wasn't the
they
park
understood
district?
it was, yeah, they understood it was SCE. We explained it that way, that we were just immediately contacted because of obviously the situation that was happening at the senior center at the time. Everybody understood.
Well, that's good to hear. Is there any more questions before we go to public comment, then discussion?
I do have questions, Brian.
Yes. Oh, I apologize, Ed.
That's all right. No, it's no worries. So Dan, some of this may be repeat, but I was listening to you and reading the original draft and the revised draft. So I just want to make sure I understand everything. Just to repeat one of the things that was just asked. So when we're told that we're going to be a site, and that would be the Rancho Santa Susana Community Center, correct?
No, we are not a site. So let me give a little background. So when these PSPS first started, they first approached the Park District for a site. I offered up the Burlwood Center and we started a contract negotiation around, indemnity and insurance and what they were going to pay us. I offered up Burlwood because at the time the center was being used and we have programming in there. And
I actually remember that.
Yeah,
Okay.
while the center is a Red Cross shelter during an emergency event, anytime we offer up the center, we have to cancel programming on a moment's notice. So in lieu, I thought the center was a little disrupted our normal operations too much, so I offered Burlwood. When we offered Burlwood, for whatever reason, I don't know if they didn't like the site or they didn't, whatever it was, they didn't follow through on their contract. And then they went to the city and signed a formal agreement with the city to use the senior center. So
Right.
that is a formal designated site with an agreement in. So what happens is if the city, and Edison's not involved in this, the city manager called me and said, hey, I just found out Edison, the power is going on at the senior center. Can you do the city a favor and offer up the center? I didn't have any discussion with Edison over it being a designated site. And then the city worked with Edison and put out the public message.
So, okay, so you're anticipating my next question. So Edison hasn't contacted you and saying we need that site. The city has contacted you as
Correct.
a backup.
Other than initially when they first started them, I was in contact with them, but the request came from the city, not from Edison.
So I guess my question is because again, as Josh doesn't know this, but the rest of the board members know, I get really reluctant about letters for just this type of reason. In terms of precision, then our contact hasn't been with Edison, it's been with the city. So our reliance on whether Edison is doing what they're supposed to be doing isn't coming directly from Edison.
Correct.
They're not the ones making the request. We don't know what they know about whether our site is going to be the one or anything like that. That's communication that's taking place between the city and Edison.
Right. So when the city manager called me, I said, sure, we can offer it up. The city manager was talking to Edison and saying, hey, by the way, Edison, because you're shutting off the power to the senior center, I've talked to the Park District and they're offering up this site. So send your people there.
But all I'm saying is I'm not saying it's inaccurate, but your reliance on that, your communication is with the city. It's not with Edison.
Correct.
Okay. And again, and how many instances have there been specifically? How many instances have there been, say, this windy season when the city has called and asked that we become a site?
One.
And when was that?
December.
Okay. And it mentions the 11th hour. What do we mean by the 11th hour?
So the designated site, let's say that power is going to be shut off on Thursday. So on Wednesday morning, Brian got notice of the public safety power shut off, the city manager, and was notified that the senior center wasn't going to be available because there's no power. So it was the day before the event that the city manager called for us to offer our building and set up our building for the thing. So it was the day before the actual need.
Okay, so it wasn't an hour or two before the
No,
actual need.
the day before. Like
And again,
that
that contact, in terms of how much advance notice you were given, we're relying on the city's information. They're not a direct contact that we've had with Edison.
Correct.
So in terms of, there's a sentence here that I've read it 5 times, and again, understand we've had other issues we've been discussing tonight, so I may just be misreading it, but I don't understand. So if you can explain what this says, or maybe if I read it out loud, I'll understand it now. It says the designated location at the Simi. Okay, so where it says the designated location at the Simi Valley Senior Center was not provided as previously planned by Edison. So by that, we're saying that the senior center was not available, correct?
Right.
Yeah, and when I say designated location, right, I'm saying that the predetermined location of what a CRC is in this community planned months ago, the senior center was not available. So it's not only in the moment, that's the designated site, and the designated site, which is the senior center, was not available as it should have been per the planning and designating a site.
Right. But that, just so that I'm clear, that particular aspect of it isn't Edison's fault, right?
No, that is.
It is. They shut the
They
power.
turned the power off.
Yeah.
Their site, this designated site by contract.
Got it. Okay, I understand now. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Ed, are there any other questions?
I do. Just give me 1 second. So what are the what are the guidelines in terms of how are they supposed to staff the center? In other words, you're indicating that they didn't staff it. How are they supposed to staff it? Is there a specifics as to how they're supposed to do that?
I think they have these CRCs and they have a group of people. I don't know the specifics, but they're supposed to staff it to a level where they can provide the service. So whether that's 2 or 3 people, I can't answer the question on that. I don't know if they have specifics on how they staff them. They probably
on that one occasion you're discussing, though, they didn't staff it with anyone.
Correct.
So is there a length or a period of time on that one occasion that we were the backup place, that we were the place that everyone was coming? I mean, I'm trying to understand, like, how long were we the center, so to speak?
A day and a half, I would say.
And did you have any contact with Edison during that time?
No.
Did you have any means to contact Edison during that time?
Yes.
Okay. So, and I guess my question is, again, when we're writing a letter, I want to make sure that we've dotted all our I's and crossed all our T's. So if we had the means to, and we weren't getting what we were supposed to be getting, why didn't we contact Edison?
Because the city manager told me that they told Edison that this is the site and send your staff and your operation to the activity center. I called the city manager during that period and I said, hey, Brian, they have not shown up to the site. I think he contacted them and let them know. So my intermediary is the city, because we are not the responsible party. We were doing a favor, so to speak, for the city and the residents. So I did contact the city manager to let him know that the designated site that was agreed to in the short term with us was not, it was open, but the staff weren't there. And I did that when they didn't show up early on, when Laura let me know.
And what are the services that it says here, and provide the needed services as promised. What are the services that they've promised to provide?
I understand, and I don't know for sure, Ed, but just anecdotally, I understand that they provide food and meals. in terms of like gift certificates. I understand that they're providing certificates for ice. So they can go there and say, hey, how long is my power going to be out for? And they might say 2 days, and somebody might say, well, I got to, whatever in my fridge. They hand out certificates for ice. They have power bars, to charge up multiple pieces of equipment. I understand that they have information. So they're supposed to provide information. So in a scenario where maybe your elderly mother is living here by herself and that you can't get a hold of her, that somebody, if you're a son and you live out of town, you can call this center and get some information on your not being able to get a hold of your grandmother. Questions, resources, like Laura mentioned, if you have medical equipment, you can rely on it and go there. If you have something that requires a charge, it's a place you can go and get it charged. Those types of things. They probably have water there. They can sit down and relax. I don't know if they may have lights there, like electric lights or something. That's the nature of the service.
Depending on the weather, they can have heating or air conditioning. Like if it's a hot
Chair
season.
Dennett, Chair Dennett, those are my questions. I do have a number of comments, but I'll wait for the appropriate time.
Elaine, do you have any questions before public comments?
Not questions. This is just a revision. I'm going to recommend the letter.
Okay, let's do that right after we take public comments, if that works for you. Is there any member of the public that would like to speak on this item?
No.
All right, then board member comments. Elaine, you had a revision suggestion, and then Ed, you said you had more input.
Yeah, just on the fourth line in the second paragraph of the revised draft, where it says staff was called upon. Right after that, I would add by the city manager of the city of Simi Valley to provide a location. So it's clear that it was called upon by the city.
Okay.
Did you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
More input, you said?
I do have a number of comments. I'm not all that comfortable with the letter, although I'm somewhat more comfortable after Elaine's suggestion. The problem that I always have with letters is when we start getting into areas that really aren't our purview, and this is kind of this is almost kind of a step removed. The contact and the direction that we have hasn't come from Edison, and that's the concern I have with this letter. Among others, I'm going to make a few comments. My temptation, despite all that, is to vote in favor of sending the letter. Just I think like probably almost the entire population of Simi Valley, just the outrage at what's been happening and the calamity that it's caused. But I don't know that that's necessarily the right reason to do it. I'm gonna indicate that I know when we were part of a lawsuit that sued Edison, I had concern that residents ultimately would be paying for that lawsuit. And that will happen. That's inevitable at this point. How it gets there and how Edison and the PUC circumvent that is another matter, but that's going to be the end result. What's happened that's worse here is that now in the process of circumventing, not only is it going to cost the residents money in terms of higher rates or taxes or whatever term you want to use for it, but the inconvenience and the businesses that have some that have already been being torn apart more by closures and power outages, and I just have to say, I mean, that was my concern with that lawsuit in the first place, and I just have to mention that at this point. My other concern here is, especially because this is one step removed from what we're involved in, since this is something we're doing through the city, not directly with Edison. While this is important, and while whatever failure they've done here, is in our instance, one occasion that we can point to. It's not something that we were directly involved with them on, and the outrageous conduct, whether the blame goes to Edison or the PUC or both, I think there's an argument for both. You know, I share in that outrage, and you know, publicly I like to express it as much as I can. I don't know that this letter for this one specific instance, that's kind of a step removed from what we're doing. I just don't know how comfortable I am with that, as tempted as I am to want to send it. And so those are my concerns.
A revision to the letter I would like to make is the line that says 11th hour. I understand that as a metaphor, but I would like to just to be more precise. So if we could change 11th hour to the time period that it was, like the day before, the night before, the morning of. Dan, is that possible?
Yes,
To get more specific on that time?
that's a good suggestion.
And then Dan, I have a question. If we send this letter and they, Ed expresses the idea of what if it's not Edison's fault, if I'm reading Ed's idea correctly, but if it's a miscommunication between Edison and the city, Edison can
Understanding
reply-
that I'm saying that's highly unlikely, but go ahead.
highly unlikely, but saying that
Right.
we weren't a direct part of that conversation, but we talked to the city. Dan, do you feel pretty confident or somewhat confident that it was Edison versus the city with the communication issue?
I'm generally aware, and I understand that lack of direct communication with Edison, but I'm generally aware of my discussions with the city manager that it hasn't just been this one time. It's been the issue of CRCs and getting them in our community has been an ongoing issue and not consistent. So I think, does that answer your question, Brian? I mean, it's.
Yeah, that does.
Yeah.
The next part to that is,
And I want to comment to Ed's point, just to comment, I think we're sending this kind of on behalf of our residents, so to speak, as elected officials. I certainly understand that point. I just wanted to clarify if we need to change the letter to reflect that it's not necessarily our role, but I think, and I'll let Director Gray comment, I thought his intent was as elected folks in this community that we were sending this not necessarily in the relationship with Edison, but just to send them another message in addition to the city council that as elected officials, we wanted to encourage Edison to please take care of our residents.
we're required to go through the city for emergency operations. We don't have our own separate setup for that, but the city takes a lead in something like this.
Correct, normally. And then, yeah, when this discussion started, it was a discussion that included us and Edison, much like the vaccines with the county, where they're looking for a location. Our only role is to provide the location. The city has the responsibility for, the overall responsibility for making sure Edison does this. Our role is simply to provide a location, oftentimes from an emergency operations perspective. So Ed is correct that we don't have a direct role in this. It is a city role. When they started the planning for this, we all talked and we looked at Burlwood, and ultimately they settled on the senior center, but that is ultimately a city decision on where the location is. We just happen to have facilities because the city, we have more facilities than the city, and they look to us to provide the resource, so to speak, through direction from the city. Yes.
I understand that power shutoffs sometimes are inevitable, but it seems like it's going to be whenever it's windy, and we live in Simi Valley. So we're going to live in a place where if it's windy, they shut off the power, and that's not an emergency or a surprise. It's just a part of power off season. And I know that this doesn't go into the letter directly, but as a teacher, I'm going to tell you, if I'm teaching from home and the power goes off, I could drive to school. But the power went off right after the power went off at my house, then it went off at school. I could have a backup system, but the drawback to the backup system is my students live across Simi Valley, one neighborhood by another, one's off, one's on. And it's not as simple as, oh, it's going to come back on later. It's 3 days maybe, or later today. So I'm good with writing the letter or sending the letter. But Josh, did you have any comment on what Dan brought up?
So which part of what Dan brought up? Just the purpose of the letter?
Yeah, he brought up, like, are we sending it specifically about our role and what happened with the
Sure.
park district,
So,
or just as
yeah.
leaders in the community?
Yeah, so I definitely take Ed's point, and I've been fighting with that too, because I'm definitely an individual who has been inconvenienced heavily by this over the last month and a half. And so I fought with that as well. My intent was dual purpose, that in my initial discussions, with Dan, was asking from a community perspective. And then upon hearing that in the instance of offering aid, that the by us offering and then them not coming forward with staff, RSRPD staff then was exposed in an extra capacity to COVID. Sorry, not doing hot right now. That, yes, so community leaders, and then I was also concerned when staff was exposed unnecessarily because Edison never provided the proper staffing to man a CRC. And with the community expectations that we were taking over, you can expect more individuals would come expecting aid, and our staff has to manage those situations rather than the Edison staff, who are supposed to be in place and should be trained in those conditions to do that. What is my intent behind this? And then as being speaking on behalf of our community, I would definitely say my biggest frustration with this is, if it were just power shutoffs in parts of the city, people could go to other parts of the city, as Brian mentioned. But when you have not just power shutoffs citywide, but you also have COVID, where people have to actively choose, especially people of advanced age or students, you have to decide, am I going to risk COVID? Am I going to risk my job? Or am I going to, you have to decide between multiple crises, which one you're most willing to expose yourself to. And so as a community organization, as a community government, I think that concerns us. I think that concerns the schools as well, but we have no say over that. But I think it's important that we say something. And I also would add on that I think we can provide further suggestions and guidance on how Edison could do a better job of servicing the community. And I can speak to those afterwards, but that would be changing topics away from the intent of the letter.
Are you good with this? Is the person that brought this up? We send the letter with the adjustment of 11th hour, to be more precise. Elaine's feedback about the city of St. Valley taking the lead. And then we keep the letter to that, the specifics of that letter, rather than broadening it.
Sure, if I could, I'm sorry, Director Gray also wanted to add something about the COVID connection.
May I comment on that?
Yes.
I have to say, I actually, to me, I actually appreciate Director Gray's comments. Here's the way I view it. I think the letter is more acceptable with the revisions suggested by Director Freeman and the chair. But the content of the letter, and with it being a one-time situation, and with it being through the city, to me, that based on that information, to me, that's more of a district manager letter. It's really not a board letter. Now, I will say that even though it does broaden it some, if we have a factual way to state what Director Gray just said in the letter, to me, that makes it a more compelling policy letter and a more compelling letter coming from a board of directors. I don't know if there is a genuine way to incorporate those thoughts, but otherwise, to me, this is a one-time incident with the city being an intermediary, and to me, that's really not a board letter, that's more a district manager letter. If it encompassed what Director Gray was saying, and if we can justify that in the letter, then, word it in a way that justifies it in the letter, then to me, while I still don't like the idea of sending letters, I would be inclined to support the letter. That's just my thoughts.
Josh, can you tell me more about what you wanted to more precisely for COVID?
Sure. So some of my thoughts that we could suggest, and I'd prefer we discuss it here and potentially include it in the letter if it makes sense to anyone else. But due to the regular frequency of PSPS events, I think it's important that COVID take a greater context role in this, and that CRCs should be, or CRC and the aid implied in there should be proportional to the number of residents being impacted and not just blanket wide. I think we should request courtesy notice from Edison or the community. They should provide a courtesy notice when they fail to meet expectations for CRCs and supplemental aid during PSPS events. And shit, sorry, my notes are.
Dan?
Stops us from sending multiple letters, which means
I would suggest.
We'll get another one 2 weeks later.
Perspective, can any of that be incorporated and justified?
Yeah, we can entirely redraft a letter that captures the tenor and the comments. I understand we want to raise it to a policy level and direct it away from a single example. I think we can accomplish that in a redrafted letter. We can do that in two ways. We can draft the letter and work with the chair and Director Gray, because it's two of you, to staff will redraft it, incorporating the points that have been mentioned, rely on the two of them to, Brian signing it to make sure it's captured the intent of the board, or we can redraft the letter and bring it back at the February 4th meeting and get the full board's input. But we can redraft the letter entirely and kind of frame it in a different way based on the comment I'm hearing, to capture the issue a little bit better, both your concerns, Ed, Josh's adds, and also the other additions that we want to make.
Director Jenner?
I don't want to work on the letter, but I would definitely want to see the letter before it was sent off. When is this? You said the city's also planning on sending a letter, or the city council is? And if so, do you know what their timetable is?
I don't.
Okay.
If I could ask the attorney a question. Brian?
Brian, are you there?
Sure, I'm here. I'm waiting for the question.
Brian, if the board approves the letter, but we're kind of wordsmithing the letter, can I share the letter with more than 2 board members to capture the direction that the entire board is providing, so we don't have to wait 2 weeks to bring it back? Meaning,
No.
can I draft a new letter and run it by more than 2 board members?
The answer is no.
Okay.
Josh, what about this? We send this letter as with the minor edits. We just send this letter. And then if you choose to work with the district manager on a broader letter about policy, open to the idea of sending another letter at a future date that's on that. The reason I mention that is I would like to get this letter out to support the efforts of our state legislators and our local leaders who are currently working on this, because this issue is not going away soon. Dan, what do you think about that?
To Ed's point, also, I could sign this letter, and then we could work on another broader letter if you want to do that too. Just as Director Abela mentioned, that's an option as well. So if the board wasn't comfortable, this being a policy letter, it could be a letter from the district manager with the points that you guys have given me.
Director Jenner, I see it as 2 letters. This is a kind of heads up letter about how poorly the situation was handled. And then if we want to send a letter recommending how Edison should handle things in a policy level, I think that's a separate letter.
I think it's a good approach.
Josh, are you good with that? That we would discuss a second letter later?
May I make
to sign it, but discuss it? Ed?
Yeah, my suggestion, this is in terms of as far as I can go with level of comfort, I would suggest if we're going to send this letter, and this is going to be the basis for why we're sending a letter, I do think it's more of a district manager, a letter. I wouldn't mind if the letter indicated that the board supports the district manager on this letter, but to me, I could not support this as a policy letter from the board. I just think it's far removed and it's one incident, and it's just not what we're here to do. So I'm just letting you know, if it's a board letter, I could not support it in this form.
Director Denner?
Yes.
I actually agree with Director Avila. I think this is a letter that points out to Edison, hey, we had this problem and it negatively affected the community. If we want to come back with a recommended, and I think it should be signed by the general manager, frankly. He had direct involvement in the incident. I mean, and he can, if Rudy calls upon him, he can explain exactly what happened with Rudy. It is a general manager letter. And then if we want to have a more thorough recommended policy to Edison, that could come back. But I think this letter to me is a general manager letter because he had direct involvement in it.
If I could, board, just one. So the points that were added by the board on COVID, my communication with the city, changing the 11th hour, I would add those points to my letter. And later, if the board wanted later, a policy level letter, but the direction I got from the board and those points I would include in my letter now.
What would you include about COVID?
I would talk to Josh and put, a few sentences in there about, and I've got a good idea what Josh was thinking and the link to COVID there and our responsibility in Edison's to protect the community and our staff because it's not only PSPS and providing these, we also have a public health crisis. So I think I've got a good handle on the direction. And then in my letter, I could have a conversation with Josh to make sure I captured that point appropriately in his mind, if it's okay with the board.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can support that.
Kate, and then
Yeah.
Yes.
I think
Josh, did you have
I think the effect of the letter and what we're after, I don't think we'd need the policy level letter to come back with that. I think it's from me. I capture these points better, and then I CC the board potentially. I think it's going to have the same effect as 2 letters. So I think we could capture our intent here and Director Gray's intent with just simply a letter from me and not a follow-up letter from the board, unless later on it still continue to be a problem and they didn't address it. Then I could bring it back to the board at more of a policy level type of tone and tenor, so to speak.
my motion is to direct the district manager to write the letter with the minor alterations of 11th hour and the city of Simi Valley. And also to send a copy of this letter to our city council and our state legislators.
And COVID.
Oh, and adding COVID as a part of that.
Okay, and I think I think that's a good decision. And thinking about this and hearing the direction from the board, I think that's a better way to go myself in the communication between I and the Edison staff and my role with the city manager. It's probably more.
So that would go to the city, our state assembly members, state senators, or state.
Should it also be sent to the PUC?
Yeah, I can
Yes.
copy whoever you guys want. So I would send it to Rudy because he's the direct person, but I can copy our legislators, the PUC, city council, the board, and the city manager, or anybody else the board would like.
And so everything being suggested it'd be signed by the district manager.
Correct.
Okay.
Are we still?
And I will run that by Josh, and make sure that, and him and I will make sure we captured what the board, what we've talked about.
I'm fine with that.
Under that premise though, and Ed's comment earlier, is the board still okay with us including not the board's signature, but the board supporting the district manager in this event? That's
Yes.
still.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was my big concern. I had
I'm
other
fine.
comments, but yeah, 1 letter is always stronger than 2.
I'm going to restate that motion. The motion is to direct the district manager to write a letter that includes that the board supports him in doing so, with the minor alterations about the 11th hour and the city of Simi Valley, and to copy that letter to the Public Utilities Commission, the city council, or state legislators, but to direct it to SEC,
And the COVID link.
SCE, and the COVID link.
Yes.
Do you have a second to that motion?
I'll second.
See, Josh had his hand up. I'm
Oh, I
gonna
thought
do,
Josh made the motion. I'm sorry.
It's all
I
good.
thought that was Josh's motion. I'll stay out of it then. You guys do the motion.
Gina, can you call the roll?
Director Abela,
Aye.
Director Freeman,
Aye.
Director Gray,
Aye.
Vice Chair O'Brien,
Aye.
and Chair Denners.
Yes. The motion carries 5-0 to send that letter. That brings us to new business, item C, approval of award of contract for the Mayboyer Park Playground Repair Project. We're gonna have a report from staff, questions, go to public comment, and then discussion.
Thank you, Chair. Wayne Nakaoka, the Director of Planning and Maintenance, will provide the staff report.
Okay. Chair Dennert, members of the board, on December 17th, 2020, the Board of Directors authorized staff to solicit bids for the Mayboyer Park Playground Repair Project. I think we're all familiar with this project. It's where we had a little controversy over a tree to be saved. Ultimately, the tree is going to be saved. The smaller diseased tree will be removed, and we are relocating a portion of the playground off to the northerly edge of the existing playground. Notice of inviting bids was published in the Ventura County Star on December 20th. 8 contractors received bid packages. On January 12th, 2021, we received 7 bids, which is outstanding for the project. The apparent lowest responsive bidder for the project is JTech Corporation from Westlake Village, California. JTech Corporation has not worked for the Park District previously. We do know their main personnel. It's a family-owned business. It's associated with Civic Construction Associates. The family owns both construction companies. You'll know that Civic Construction recently completed the Burwood Skate Plaza project. We have checked the licenses for JTech Corporation with the State Contractors License Board. They've been in business for 4 years without any complaints filed against their license. They are registered to perform public works construction with the Department of Industrial Relations. Staff is confident in the ability of the company. The owner of the company was the project superintendent who built the Burwood Skate Plaza and will be doing this project himself along with his staff. Staff is requesting a 15% contingency above the bid price of $62,500, which brings the estimated total for the project at $71,875. Adequate funding for this project has been earmarked in the district's budget under the special zone tax in the amount of $75,000. At this time, staff is requesting that an awarded contract for the Mayboyer Playground Repair Project to JTech Corporation of Westlake Village in the amount of $62,500, which includes both the base bid and the bid alternate. 2, authorize the district manager to execute an agreement on behalf of the Park District and to amend the agreement for project contingencies in amount of not exceeding $9,375. And I am available to answer any questions that you may have.
Wayne, my first question for you is, this is not a question that I had directly, but was brought to my attention by a member of the public. How often we use contractors or go outside of our the Park District to do projects? And I understand that this is not a project typically done by our staff, but the question was asked by a public and I'd like to be able to give them a decent answer. Versus other park districts, are we using contractors more or less, about the same?
We contract anything over $25,000. That's our limitation at this point in time per the policy manual and in conformance with the Public Resource Code. A lot of the work or projects could be done in-house, but we break it down to if it can be done within a week by the district staff, it may be advantageous for us to do it. Anything over a week, to lock up 5 or 6 of my staff members on the building maintenance crew would be kind of detrimental to the park district. We need them to go out and start or repair the drinking fountains, the playgrounds, the benches and everything. So I'd
Wayne,
say,
that $25,000 figure, is that the same figure that most other park districts are likely using?
no, a lot of cities and park districts allow their district manager to award contracts under $50,000 and go to public bid over $50,000. We're just set per our policy manual on the public resource code at $25,000.
Thank you. Dan, what were you going to say about that?
On the question related to our contracting practices and how much we do versus other agencies, in my experience, I would say we do less contracting and we do more in-house work. We've got an expert woodworker, for example. And so some kind of in the box where is it maintenance or a capital project? In my experience, we do stuff more in-house, which is advantageous because we take a passion and a control for a lot of our projects. So I would say comparatively, we do more stuff in-house than other agencies might do. Also, to Wayne's point, is when we do these things, our staff has a workload just on maintenance and, you know, little projects and signage and things like that. So when we get stuff like this and where it's a one-time project and it doesn't make sense to have the staff for these projects, like Wayne said, it's an enhancement to our staff when we're doing capital projects. So because we don't have the ability to absorb more work theoretically, because our existing folks have their schedules are somewhat full with their normal day-to-day duties.
I might ask that at a different time, but that's more broad than just this right in front of us. So I'll stop at that with that line of question.
Sure, if I could, because this is exciting to talk about, and I'm glad the board's taking an interest in it. We could have the maintenance building over in Oak Park. That was an item that we could have contracted out, but Wayne and the staff felt that that was a project they could tackle. So instead of contracting that out, we did a lot of that work in-house, which saved the district a considerable amount of money and time and effort with bidding and all of that stuff. There are other projects, replacing shade structures and things like that, that a lot of agencies would contract out, and we have the expertise on staff to do those, which saves time and money and delivers the project more quickly than if you had to go through a public bidding process. So just wanted to make that point. I appreciate the question and the opportunity to educate the board on our contracting practices.
That's the importance of listening to the public, because that was something that was brought to my attention that without that, I hadn't considered what percentage of projects we do, but I'll be able to get back to them. Wayne, my second question is the last contractor on there that's listed. I get what you're saying. It's good that we have a variety of bids, but their bid was so far off the other contractors. Looking at FS contractors, have we worked with them before? How often do we work with them? Can you talk about that?
We've never worked with FS contractors. And I can't say I've even heard of them.
I would just be concerned if they're slightly more expensive, maybe they're planning to do it in a better way, but if they're that expensive, I would be worried about why they came up with that price. But if we don't have enough experience to comment on that,
I'll just say that, I'm sorry. I'll just say that the 3 lowest bidders, considering that JTEC Corporation is part of Civic Construction or they're owned by the same family, the 3 lowest bidders for the project have all worked for the Park District.
You had a question?
No, I'm just saying, did we give JTEC a chance to review their bid?
Yes.
Okay, good. And they stuck with it. Okay. If you get one way, standard procedure.
I'll make a motion to follow.
Elaine, I apologize. We have to ask for public comment.
Oh.
Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this? Harry, I see you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah, just on behalf of Oak Park, thank you guys for moving this forward.
Thank you, Harry. Then I believe I saw Elaine made a motion and Ed seconded it. Was that correct?
I didn't, but I will.
All right. Gina, will you call the roll? The motion is to approve both items, which is the contract and to give the general manager ability for the cost contingency.
Director Abela,
Aye.
Director Freeman,
Aye.
Director Gray,
Aye.
Vice Chair O'Brien,
Aye.
and Chair Jenner.
That brings us to new business item D, approval of award of contract for RP Strathern Historical Park, CME Adobe Roof Replacement Project.
Chair Dennert, members of the board, on October 20th, 2020, the board authorized staff to solicit bids for the Robert P. Strathern Historical Park Adobe Roof Replacement Project. As you all know, this project was requested by the Simi Valley Historical Society due to a leaking roof condition over the Strathern Adobe portion of the Strathern House Adobe building. The Cultural Heritage Board, we did file for a permit, gave us a certificate of appropriateness on October 1st, 2020. Notice of inviting bids was published in the Ventura County Star on November 4th. Due to the low interest in the project, staff extended the bid period from December 15th to January 12th of this year, primarily due to the low amount of contractors that picked up plans and specifications at that time. I think we had one contractor at December 15th that had plans and specifications for the project. Oh, I heard somebody.
It's my
A
phone.
total of 3 contractors picked up bid packages ultimately for the project. On January 20th or on January 12th bid opening, we received 2 written bids for the project. The lowest responsive bidder at this time is Chapman Coast Roofing Company from Fullerton, California. I don't know anything about Chapman Roofing Company. I did ask for a background information from their company. They sent me over 20 pages of projects they have completed. This company is well versed in roofing. They are a roofing or a union contractor. They do a lot of work for the LA Unified School District, and they've done a lot of work for the city of Los Angeles. I did check their licensing. They've been in business for 12 years with no complaints filed. They are registered with the State Department of Industrial Relations to perform public works construction. Like I said, they are signatory to 2 unions. Staff is very confident in the ability of this company to perform the project. And we're recommending that an award of contract in the amount of $46,375 be made tonight. Due to the unusual situation we have out there, it's a historic building, it's over 100 years old. I do not know what the substrate condition is underneath the existing roofing. I probably should, since I'm the one who did the Adobe retrofit in 1995, but I can't remember what the roof looked like. Based upon that, I'm asking for a lump sum contingency of $10,000 to the contract, which brings the total estimated project cost of $56,375. Adequate funding is in the budget this year under the capital outlay fund in the amount of $75,000. And staff is requesting that the board award a contract for the Robert P. Strathern Historical Park Adobe Roof Replacement Project to Chapman Coast Roof Company of Fullerton, California in the amount of $46,375, and authorize the district manager to execute the agreement on behalf of the Park District and to amend the agreement for project contingencies in an amount not to exceed $10,000. And I am here to answer any questions you would like.
Are there any questions for Wayne?
Yes, curious, I'm just glad to see that you got the 2 bids because there was concern that there wasn't adequate contractors, but was the board of the Historical Society given a copy of the staff report, do you know?
No, I did not send it directly.
Okay, I would just like to move staff's recommendation on item 1 and 2, the $46,370. Plus the
Wayne, I'm not going to, I do have to see if there's any public comment on this item. Is there any public comment on this item? Not seeing any public comment. I heard there was a motion from Elaine and a second from Kate. Kate, is that correct?
Yes, that's
I
correct.
think she did, yeah.
Gina, can you call the roll?
Can I just make one comment, Brian?
Oh, yes.
I
Discussion.
just wanted to, Wayne, you get my hero award tonight. 2 consecutive projects, both under budget. You've made my night.
I'm running 50% this year.
I'm doing this just to see how Gina puts this into the comments, but I use the clap emoji. So Gina, go ahead and figure out how you are supposed to reflect that in the minutes.
Yeah, I figured out how to spell gypped, so I can do anything.
That's right.
Okay.
And I noticed that.
Director Abela,
Aye.
Director Freeman,
Aye.
Director Gray,
Aye.
Vice Chair O'Brien,
Aye.
and Chair Dennert.
Aye.
Thank you.
That brings us to written communications of note. Does anybody have any written communications of note? And Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a few items. I just wanted to make the board aware that we've had a couple requests for memorial bench. And I've explained our policy to them that they're not allowed, but I wanted to make the board aware of that. The board's aware, we've also received several pieces of communication about the Medea Creek project that was discussed at the Oak Park Committee. That'll be on your agenda for February 4th to talk about that. And then also I received a request for improvements at the Sycamore disc golf course. Brian, I don't know if the terminology's the disc golf course, they're looking for some improvements up there that look pretty significant. Wayne and I'll have to evaluate that to see if we agree that it needs some tender loving care, so to speak. That's it.
You correctly said it. As long as you don't call it Frisbee, it's disc golf.
Okay.
That brings us to any other written communications of note? That brings us to board member reports. Elaine?
Yes, I had 2 things. Ventura County Special Districts Association, which was a special meeting. We should take pride in our general manager, district manager. He, along with Mary Otten from Pleasant Valley and Jim Friedel from Caneo, came together and worked with other special districts in the county and met with county staff, did a survey and formed a group to go to the county as a group, not as individual special districts, to make available to special districts any federal money that could, or federal or state money that comes forward as a result of COVID. And the total for that, as of that meeting on January 12th, was $3,468,130 that special districts in Ventura County had experienced as a result of the COVID. But Dan and Jim and Mary took the lead, and I really want to thank our general manager. He did a great job. We had the Oak Park subcommittee meeting with Director Abelo, and the big discussion was on trees. And I believe that we have a policy, and I think the district manager is working with the committee, but it will probably be discussed at the next joint meeting. Then that was it.
Thank you. Kate?
Me? Oh.
Yes.
Well, I also had the special district association meeting with Director Freeman on the COVID-19 letter, which was approved and set off. That was good. I didn't have any other meetings. I did read an interesting article in the CSD magazine for November, December on the Listos California Emergency Preparedness Campaign, which I thought was kind of intriguing, and it's something we might want to look at more ourselves, because apparently it's a partnership of California and special districts formed after the Paradise Fire in 2018. So that's something I might bring up sometime, as something we might want to explore a little more, but I want to read about it more before I do. And I just want to echo what Chair Dennert said about blood donations. I'm going on the 12th, I think. I've signed up to do that regular blood donor with 5 lymphs. So, and it's sent to the community center. O negative, so universal donor. And that's it.
Thank you, Kate. Ed?
Sure. Thank you, Brian. I had the Oak Park committee with Elaine. The only thing I'll add is, Brian, I know your suggestion about looking into either a youth member or a youth advisory member. There seems to be interest from the Oak Park committee on that. Dan can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they're going to discuss that in more detail at their next committee meeting.
I was going to bring it back for a little discussion with our board on the February 4th meeting as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. All right. That's fine. But in any event, it looks like that has some momentum, Brian. And then the second thing, I want to share a brief quote that I shared with volunteers on the MLK Day of Service. And that is, everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love. And I have to tell you, for me, that event exceeded expectations. We were limited by COVID in terms of size, but we weren't limited in terms of enthusiasm. I know I went to Rancho Santa Susana Park. I knew, or at least I was told, I shouldn't say I knew, but I was told that Brian and Josh were going to be at Corriganville. And the 3 families that were that participated there were all enthusiastic. They seemed to have a great time, and I props to Laura and to Kelly, who actually not only was out there serving as a staff member, but she was out there painting too. So that was awesome to see. And Wayne, I don't know his last name. I've seen him because I spent time at Rancho Santa Susana Park. But Thomas, one of your maintenance workers there, was just great with the families and driving the materials around for them. And he kind of hit a home run with the whole thing. So I have to throw props out to him in terms of his participation. I want to say in the past several years, we've done some special things on this board. I think of the skate park, the fact that we're televising meetings, the fact that we're allowing families to use their bikes and scooters in the parks. And I think everyone knows that the Veterans Day event has the most meaning to me. It's hard to sometimes predict where things are going to go. And I have a feeling there's going to be some growing pains with the MLK Day of Service. But 10, 20 years down the road, this board may well be remembered for getting this going. And Brian, you deserve such a pat on the back for your vision. I think you're onto something here. I hope you're onto something. Everybody knows I love to quote public figures, and Martin Luther King in recent years has kind of become a close number 2 to Ronald Reagan for me. So it's a day that means a lot. And I just have to say to the staff, to the whole board and to Brian, I think this was a wonderful idea. And you should be proud, and let's see where this goes in the next decade or two. Like I said, an event like this, I can see where there may be growing pains, but this has such enormous potential, and I thought it got off to a roaring start. I do have one question for Dan and maybe Chair Dennard as well, because you might have more knowledge about whether this would even be appropriate, and to Dan, whether this would be feasible. Not so much the board members, certainly not me, but as far as the volunteers, the non-staff, non-board members who participated, since this was our inaugural event, since all indications are it was such a success, does it make sense? Is there a possibility of maybe getting certificates for them or something like that? It's just a suggestion. It may not be a good idea. I just wanted to throw it out there. But again, I just want to applaud everyone on what I think was a great event. That's all I've got.
I think it's a great idea, and we can incorporate that into a future board meeting if the board wants, or we can give them certificates outside of a board meeting. I'd recommend we do it at a board meeting, and we'll get a hold of families and ask them to get on Zoom, and we'll create certificates for kicking off our MLK Day of Service program.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Ed. Josh?
Sure. So mine also kind of mimic a lot of Ed's comments. I thought the MLK Day event was fantastic. I wanted to thank the Corganville staff that were the staff that were present at Corganville. Paul, Greg, and Zach were absolutely fantastic. We had people of all ages and capabilities, and that was also, there was a surprisingly intense hike involved in the Corganville bit to go cover graffiti, which was commented by every volunteer. I think everybody appreciated it at the end, but I do think as just a little growing pain comment is in the future, anything that might require that level of physical intensity, we should give forewarning so people can dress properly. I was forewarned and didn't realize that the volunteers had not been told they would be hiking in order to get there. But I do appreciate that staff did prepare ahead of time, having the equipment and the supplies already up there. All the volunteers had to do was show up and then hike, and then they could paint the graffiti. So I want to thank Paul, Greg, and Zach. All did fantastic with all the volunteers. The volunteers were great. I also want to thank Thomas at Santa Susana. I'm sorry I missed you, Ed. I didn't know you were there until after the event. But Corganville finished up so like in under an hour. So I went to the next event to try and thank volunteers there as well, and ran into Thomas, who was absolutely enthused and was still revving up the two volunteers I saw there, who were also reflective of the people at Corganville who were revved up, were asking if there was more they could do. They were excited for next time. And I had from in both locations, individuals asking if they didn't have to wait till next year to get involved in a service event, but if they could do another one sometime in 2021. I liked the I volunteered sign for social media that encouraged social media sharing and talking about the event. Unfortunately, that wasn't at Corganville, but I did see it once I had gone to other locations. I think that's a great idea, and it should be emphasized a little bit more to grow the name of it in future years. I definitely think more projects, if we increase the number of volunteers or the slots, even for the current number, my own experience showed that we didn't have enough projects that volunteers could engage in. They were excited, but then they were gone within an hour. Volunteer comments were generally, they wanted us to involve more of the community, have more people. They're looking forward to being able to do it post-COVID. I know there was a staff comment about Corganville wishing they could cover the graffiti at the 118 underpass more than once a year. They requested quarterly. I will say from my own observation, I don't think the graffiti was rampant, and the staffer had said it had been well over a year since it had been covered. But I would add that while it wasn't rampant, the content was far from PG-13 and not appropriate for children. And so we had 2 kids helping paint, and we had to send them to a different part as we quickly covered that aspect. And I do think if COVID were to be an impact of any service event of the district again, it would be a good idea to better mark off zones per household and kind of segment it more. That was a little bit of an issue, and part of that is also we're in a tunnel, but having segmented by household would have been an improvement. I do want to thank Brian, myself as well. This event was fantastic. Everybody I talked to was excited about it. I had a lot of fun, and I do think this will be the first of many, and I certainly think it should be.
Brian, can I say one thing?
Yes, sir.
I do want to say that at Rancho Santa Susana, and I think it probably depends a lot on the park, but I do want to say that things were segmented well there. The projects were, it was well designed, and it kept the families each in their own place. So again, that could have to do with the park where it took place, but I do think at Rancho Santa Susana, at least, things were appropriately distanced.
I'm glad to
Josh,
hear
is
that.
that it for your board report?
No, I had a quick
Yes.
addition.
Keep
I also
going.
wanted to thank staff for being patient and let the board know that I haven't yet been able to speak to staff about filming in the district. And that's just due PSPS events. I also heard excitement about the development we are doing around the Arroyo and people looking forward to that progression over the years. And I have also heard commentary from people who are absolutely enthused to hear that our board meetings are televised as well. That concludes my.
Thank you, Josh.
Josh, the Arroyo, we're talking about the bicycle pedestrian improvements on the Arroyo?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure, yeah.
For my board report first, for Martin Luther King Day, he wanted to create a beloved community. And it's not just about the service on that particular day, but uniting us in common work that we do together. And if we could paint a fence or cover some graffiti, that's the start of maybe moving on to poverty and racism. But it might begin with some common work where we work together on something together. I saw so much goodwill in the community to be called on. Like people are rushing to try to sign up and trying to figure out how to use Max Galaxy. I know one person from St. Valley even went to Oak Park because they wanted to serve so much. They were willing to drive just to be a part of it. And in the future, I'm going to suggest that this is an annual event. Not tonight, but I'll bring it up as a agenda item that we discuss, a board policy, that this is something that we just always do. So Ed, as you mentioned earlier, future generations, our policy will just be that we do it, but we'll discuss that in a future board meeting as an agenda item. I do want to suggest, Josh, I get what you're saying about the hike, but to the staff, do not tell my sisters if there's a hike. My sisters helped to paint that tunnel, and they did not know about the hike so much. I gave them a hint, but don't tell everybody but them. And I know that we had signs, staff, if we have any of the extra signs around, just personally, I would like one. The signs that we made for the event. If we don't have any, that's okay. I do want to thank the staff specifically that worked on it. I had heard that Nikki, Wayne, and Laura had a chance to organize the different events. And I understand that as a board member, we get to come up with fun ideas and then we tell staff figure it out. So thank you for figuring out that we didn't just decide we'll wait till another year to do it. We did it anyways and found us a way that's as safe as possible to do it. So with that, I'm going to move on from the Martin Luther King Day event, but with the last part, Martin Luther King was in 1963, gave I Have a Dream speech. He was killed in 1968. I promise you he did a lot of things in those 5 years in between, and it was so much more. So maybe in a future time we'll discuss that, but he had so many different parts of how he wanted to create that community. All right, for my other parts of the board report, I joined in the open space roundtable that Linda Parks organized. And specifically today, so much about butterflies. If anyone wants to talk about that later, I will. But I found out we could do a part of it, but a wintering site has to be closer to the coast. And the eucalyptus trees are good for that. So maybe another night. And then Dan, has anyone from the BMX community contacted us about organizing a group to run a BMX park?
No.
All right. That brings me to the next part, the Oak Park Committee. Dan, you said we heard from them about possible youth members or advisor member, but you'll give us an update on the next meeting?
Correct. Yeah, they were supportive of it. They like the appointed concept versus the elected concept, but I'll give a full report at the February 4th meeting, which is our Oak Park meeting, where I'd anticipate we'd have more folks from Oak Park participating. So they were supportive, and I'll give a full briefing to the board. They did want us to come back at a future meeting with some more criteria for the selection at their next meeting, but I'll give the board an update at the February 4th meeting, yes.
And so then my next item is for our social media website. I'm specifically talking to the other board members and maybe staff. If you like every post, you get to become a top fan. So on Facebook, it says I'm a top fan of the Park District. I'm just telling you, maybe some days you see a post, like it because it helps to trigger the algorithm and share what we're doing with the public. So consider liking as many posts as you can.
Commenting and sharing is twice as powerful as liking too, for anybody. wants to
Let's
know.
see who's the top fan at our next meeting. Dan, I know that you mentioned it, but the county, have they mentioned anything recently about turning a park into a testing site?
No, it's real early in the discussion. I think most of the bulk of the testing they're talking about in the spring and the summer. So they're really, when we're doing mass numbers of vaccines. So they've talked about locations that are not park district properties at this point as potential locations. Part of the issue is parking, size of facility, ingress and egress. And there's other locations that the city think is working, but obviously will be a part of the discussion. So I expect that, and it also involves the county because those are the ones that staff it. So the county, like they did the testing sites, did more of a regional approach. They did testing at Moore Park College, Oxnard College. I think they had one in Santa Paula. We may end up with a more regional approach, or we could end up with vaccine availability in each community, but that is yet to be determined. I think the county is still trying to figure out the numbers, how many doses they'll have, and how they're going to be able to staff it. But we are actively involved in that discussion, and the city obviously will take the lead on that, and will be there in a support role should they need our assistance.
I bring that up because the Moore Park testing site is usually efficient. I've been tested a few times there. When it's open, it's been closed because of winds and issues, but when it's open, the school district, as part of their plan for returning to schools, is going to have testing on campus. So for their staff to be tested. And if that's a possibility for our staff, or maybe it's open to the public, maybe not. I'm not specifically talking about vaccines, but just it's so easy if it's at your work site to often be tested.
I can mention that, like I said, the direction starts with the county because they staff them. So that's where the conversation starts, and then it flows down to the cities, and in our case, down to our district. So it's really county directed on where the locations are, what the need is, what the numbers are, and then it kind of flows from the county direction down to and then they make requests of us as a city and as a district.
Thank you. And I know that this might be more of an agenda item, but I'm going to mention it now. And Dan, you can give me feedback on this. Skate shops often pose a challenge to local skaters to say, here are a couple spots in town to go skate, and then do these tricks and take a photo or a video. And then you get some stickers or a hat or a skateboard, you get some prizes. My idea is the same concept of you issue a challenge, but not skating, but for local restaurants. So we issue a challenge on social media, like a style of food, and take it to a park and take a picture. Because it could follow the guidelines, people are allowed to have a picnic. They're supposed to stay with members of their own household. And it'll show our public that we're trying to support our restaurants in a challenging time. And also just a fun way to, I know I realize this week it's cold, it's windy, the power's out. So I'm not saying this particular week, but I'd be interested if that's an agenda item that we should bring up, or just maybe staff will consider it and see if it's practical.
Sounds like a great project for our interim director of recreation. And I don't think I need a board decision. I can work with her on doing that program while we
the city does like takeout Tuesdays, so we could partner with their social media, like go on a picnic tonight to a park. We might not suggest everybody at the same park, that's counter to the whole point, but maybe we could help restaurants a little bit.
Brian and Dan, can we share that with Oak Park too? Could it be Olive Ranches? To me, it's a great idea.
Sure.
So I'll mention it into the next Oak Park committee meeting. Thanks.
Is that something that, Brian, that you would consider with the chamber?
Yes, I like that idea.
Yeah.
But listening to Dan, that sounds like we throw out the idea and staff sees how it's practical and possible.
Yeah, there's time and commitment, and we may need to size it so it's something we can handle and get done quickly and do it well.
Hey, thank you for donating blood. If some people might not even realize they've recovered from a coronavirus, but if you have, your blood actually can help people get out of hospitals. We open up spaces in hospitals. We get to open up schools and businesses. So it's possible by donating blood, we can help towards that. The last item, and it's a long night, I'm going to add an agenda item in the near future to talk about what we should do for Earth Day. I know it's coming up in April, and likely there will still be many restrictions, but I would just like to hear some ideas from staff of what could we do, but not tonight. That's it for me. Report by district manager.
Yeah, board, I've got a lengthy report, so bear with me. I'll try to get it quickly. We got a lot going on and a lot to update you on. First, wind damage and the impacts to our parks. Again, I'm going to do my bucketing. Generally, all of our parks were impacted. Leaves, branches and stuff all around the parks and cleanup duties. So every park generally was impacted. I will say, so that's, you know, within that, we had 3 parks where we had significant impact, and I'll state what those are. We had another 10 or so parks that were moderately impacted, and the rest I would say were minorly impacted. The 3 locations where we have some significant impacts was Rancho Santa Su. 1 second. Oh, I think that's Rancho Simi. We had a significant tree, I don't know, maybe 80-foot tree with a root bulb of, I don't know, 15 feet high, fall at Rancho Simi. We had 2 sycamores that fell down on the driving range and actually across where the golfers are at Sinaloa Golf Course. And we had a significant tree compromised at Verde Park. I say those are significant. You're talking about a cleanup if we were to, of those trees of on the order of, you know, $6,000 to $12,000 to get those trees cleaned up, given their size. The other parks we had damage in. I did want to note that I would, you know, I'd estimate our damage at 35 to 40,000 in cleanup and tree cleanup and costs. In addition, I wanted to let the board know that it's probably 3 or 4 days for all of our crews to get those parks back to normal. So in addition to the tree work, it's, you know, 3 or 4 days of work for our crews to get the parks back to just where they were to clean up from that type of event. That being said, the crews jumped on it actually starting yesterday, which was the day after the major events. I was out there visiting locations today and also yesterday and the day of the event, and they were all working on it and getting our parks back in order very quickly. Thank you to our staff and to Wayne, to all committed to cleaning up from the significant wind event. I think I'll stop on that one to see if anybody has any questions on the wind before I go through the other items.
I have a question. Insurance covers a lot of this, does it not?
Yes. Yep.
That's
So
good.
insurance
Okay.
cover will cover
Even- I
damage. Insurance will cover damage in developed parks. Yeah.
Okay.
There were no structures damaged, though.
I'll defer to Wayne. I don't believe we had any structure damage, but I'll ask Wayne that.
Well, we had no structural damage to buildings. The only one that Dan missed was we did have a tenant arm break off one of the 6
Oh, that's right.
light poles at Rancho Santa Susana, which had 2 fixtures on it. So both of those fixtures are sitting on the ground with the tenant arm at this time. It's going to be a little costly to get it back up because we have to re-weld that arm back up there at 60-foot elevation. So I have to find myself a crane and a certified welder to get it done.
What we're talking about is the light standards on the top of a light pole, or that holds the light, the arms. That was compromised at Rancho Santa Su, and it's quite a bit of work to fix that.
Any other questions?
Okay, moving on, exciting news. We're going to start the process for Rancho Susana's phase 4. We've got conceptual drawings that are nearing completion. I would envision, and not necessarily sticking to the schedule, but I would envision bringing that to the Advanced Planning Committee probably in the next couple of months. And then we'll bring it to the full board for conceptual approval, and then we'll be ready to start design on that. I did want to note we'll probably meet with the city first to make sure that with our conceptual design, just talk that through with them and make sure there's no flags. But happy to report that we're starting serious work on the Rancho Santa Susana phase core project. I am meeting again the Historical Society of Interest to Kate and Elaine because they're tracking this about staffing costs. We were supposed to have that meeting yesterday or 2 days ago, but because of the power and all of that, that had to be postponed. So we'll start with the staff level committee meeting and then probably kind of bring it to the historical committee as well. MLK Day, a lot of great comments. I heard it was a great event. I haven't fully debriefed with the staff. I just want to note that there is a sweet spot there with volunteers. You can spend all of your hours on a project coordinating, herding the cats, so to speak, or actually getting work done. So the size of the crews matter in that if you want to get work done, you've got to, there's a sweet spot there to get the work rather than spending all your time organizing the crews. So I did get that feedback. So as we talk about making it an annual event, the staff had some observations too that we can size that event appropriately. I did want to, I will probably bring, we're at a point where we need to purchase the showmobile. If the board will recall, we have that in the budget, but we held off on the purchase of COVID. But we've got a lot of events planned, hopefully looking toward an opening, the Rotary Club and schools and our own concerts in the park. I think we're at a point, and the old showmobile is done, it's kaput. So I'm at a point where instead of renting stages and buying them, I think it makes sense to you know, bite the bullet and make that purchase. So I'll probably be bringing that to the board in February. And if you guys aren't okay with it, that's fine. I get it. I'll bring the item. If you're not comfortable with it, we can move on, but that'll be a future meeting.
Ross, you had a question about the showmobile?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan, can for my benefit, can you quickly define showmobile?
Yeah, it's a portable stage that's on the back of a truck. So it's where you can have concerts and dances and music. We've had one that I think is about 35 years old that we used forever, and it's basically fallen apart. It's an expensive piece of equipment, but it's not only do we use it, other organizations in the community use it, and we're the only one that has one. So our old one went down. The board at the time, because of COVID and financial impacts and those kind of things, we delayed the purchase of that. I am more comfortable with our finances now and have a better picture on that. And it's kind of a priority thing we need to get not only for ourselves, but for the community, so that as they're planning these events, we have that apparatus that folks can use for community events.
Chair, in fairness to Dan also, Dan wanted to bring this to the board last year, and right around the time he wanted to bring it to the board is when we were hit with COVID and COVID restrictions. So we talked about it, and it just didn't seem appropriate at the time because it was pretty clear what direction the concerts in the park were headed. And to, again, so in fairness to Dan, he has held off on this item. And so it probably is time to bring it to the board, you know, reasonably soon, especially if there is some potential for concerts in the park.
And the vaccine's coming also, Ed. So hopefully there's a path to opening, and we want to make sure we're positioned to hold those events. So open space roundtable, I participated in that with Director Dinnert. The activity center, we are working on the RFP for an architect. So Wayne's drafting that up. That's our next step, is to hire an architect to design the activity center. That's moving along. Oak Park open space, we'll bring that discussion back. The committee members heard some of the committee's comments, or our board members did. We'll bring that back for a discussion. We are having a bit of a challenge with golf pay. We've got, because of minimum wage going up, we've got compaction, but as busy as we are, Brian Reed is needing some help out there, and our pay is holding us back. So I'm going to meet with staff and evaluate that. I'll probably have a discussion with the committee about it. That might be an item. Normally we do our part-time pay schedule, you know, in December, but I might need to bring that back kind of mid-year because of Brian's staffing challenges out there. Vaccine locations we talked about. The Oak Park election, we currently have 4 nominations. The deadline is the 26th I think it's 26th, right, Laura? I think for the MAC meeting, but we currently have 4 nominations, which is more than the amount of seats that are available. So we will have a successful election there. There's a few issues that are on my list. I just want to let the board know. Brian, the one-wheelers, that's on my list to think about and address. The issue of solar, Wayne and I have talked about that, and a process for getting that solar analysis done that we had put in the budget. The geese issues at Rancho Simi, that's still on our to-do list. And then another budget item was replacing those interpretive signs at Corriganville Park. I think Director Freeman brought that up. It's in the budget. That's on our list to get done also. A few more items here. We are working on some events with outside groups. The Rotary clubs have several events upcoming that they're planned. The Kiwanis, we signed off on a permit to do a wine event out there, I think in September, later in the fall. But they're planning to do a wine event there. And we're getting folks that are more interested in picking these events back up. We did hold the citizens program staff training. So we've got a good plan in place. I'll probably go over that with the board individually. It goes to the point of how are we going to make sure it's our marketing is centralized, consistent, and how are we going to get that work done. I think Ed was interested in the process of that. So we have a nice process in place that the staff has been planned on, and I can brief the board on that as well. Josh is officially a subscription receiver from National Recreation and Parks Association. So he will be getting his magazines as Director Dennert has.
You're breaking.
Sure he gets. What's that?
Having trouble hearing you.
Okay. Josh is going to get his magazine. So that's been completed. And it's our 60th birthday on October 25th. In October. So we've got a staff committee. Obviously, we want board input on that. I'll probably bring in a short item to the board and maybe get it assigned to a committee, maybe not. But staff is going to meet and kick around some ideas for our 60th. I'm assuming that the board will want to do something to celebrate. We usually celebrate every decade. So we'll be bringing some ideas to the board and getting board input and involvement in that. Upcoming board meeting, February 4th, we're hopeful to do the after school club fees. We may do golf fees depending on when we can have our committee meeting, but after school club fees, Oak Park committee follow-up, Medea Creek and youth involvement, new agreement with the depot. There's a ranger policy change we would like to bring to the board, and again, golf fees perhaps. Upcoming committee meetings. We've received the money from the Murphy estate. So we have a meeting with Brian and Elaine scheduled for February 2nd at 3:30 to start talking about what we may propose in terms of uses of that money. We have the Special Needs Committee, which is an ad hoc committee that is scheduled for February 17th at 3:30. That is Brian and Kate, I believe. And then we'll probably have a golf committee meeting. We're still trying to nail down the dates. The principal item on there will be golf fees moving forward. And with that, that was long, but that concludes my report.
No questions seen on the report. We do not have a closed session tonight, so this meeting is adjourned.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
All right.